People often say that love is the ultimate cure for every wound. For Blair, however, love had been the deadliest poison, one that had slowly strangled the life out of her until her final breath. Tonight, in the hushed silence of her wedding night within the opulent palace, moonlight spilled coldly through the tall windows, mocking the bitter woman seated in its glow. Blair knew this marriage was nothing more than a calculated contract meant to last a single year. She had sworn to herself that she would never again let her heart stir at her husband's handsome face or his deceptively warm touch. That same warmth had once deceived her, luring her into a cruel illusion that ended in unimaginable tragedy. Yet if love was truly dead, why had she still walked into this chamber? Why did she endure the touch of that man R in her previous life? There was only one answer. Asil, her precious child, the sole reason she had drawn breath in her past existence. To see him again, to give him another chance at life in this world, Blair would endure anything. She would suffer as many nights like this as necessary, even if it meant lying with the man who might have been her killer. 2 years earlier, before her regression through time, Herden and his aide were walking toward the carriage when a voice called out, stopping him. "Herden!" Blair stood there, her condition clearly delicate. "What are you doing here? In your current state, you shouldn't be overexerting yourself." She hesitated, then gathered her courage. "I heard you had arrived in the capital. It's been over 6 months since I last saw you. I had hoped you might stop by the estate." Blair paused, then continued softly, "Herden, could you spare me even 1 hour?" "No, 30 minutes would be enough." Inside the carriage, an awkward silence hung heavily between them. Blair turned her face away, embarrassed. How strange, she thought. I had so many things I wanted to say, but now that he's here, my mind is completely blank. "When will you return to the capital?" she asked. "I'm not certain. I see." She swallowed. "I was wondering, did you ever receive my letters?" I never got a reply, so before she could finish, the baby kicked hard inside her. Blair smiled faintly. "I think the little one knows his father is here. He kicks so strongly that I can barely sleep at night." The Duke stared at her swollen belly with cold, indifferent eyes, then looked away. "I see. Would you like to feel it?" she offered. "No," Herden replied flatly. "I'm fine." His rejection left her stunned. After a long moment, she murmured, "I understand." Outside, snow continued to fall, as if mirroring her deepening despair. Herden gave a curt nod. "Then I'll be going. I hope you have a safe delivery." His indifferent words stung. Unable to hold back any longer, Blair spoke up. "Please, give the child a name before you leave." Herden paused, thinking briefly. "If it's a girl, name her Diana. If it's a boy, Aziel." He turned away impatiently, as if the matter no longer concerned him. "If you have other ideas, it doesn't matter." "No," Blair said, her face lighting up with genuine happiness. "I love those names. They're the first gift you've ever given our child." For a fleeting moment, something in her radiant expression made him frown in discomfort. Without another word, he turned on his heel and strode away. Duke Herden Delmark, the only swordmaster on the continent blessed by a divine beast, and a celebrated war hero. And then there was me, Blair Delmark, Princess of the Ardell Empire and the current Duchess of Delmark. Herden left for the main castle the moment I became pregnant. Officially, it was to suppress a monster outbreak in the north. But I knew better than anyone. It was merely an excuse to stay away from me. Our marriage had always been purely political. The long-standing, deep-seated enmity between the Delmark ducal house and the imperial family made sure of that. "Herden, I know you must hate me, but I just wanted you to stay by my side." I was terrified of being alone. Blair whispered these words to his cold, retreating back. Yet Herden did not return, even when Aziel was born. When he finally came back half a year later, he brought with him a woman with striking silver hair. Earlier that day, a maid had rushed in, flustered. "Madam! Madam! The Duke is almost here!" Blair turned, unable to hide the joy blooming on her face. "Aziel, your father is coming. Shall we go welcome him?" The innocent little boy looked up at her in confusion. Blair hugged him gently and whispered, "This is the first time you'll meet your father since you were in my belly, isn't it? Mommy is very excited, too." Half a year had passed since Herden departed for the north. He hadn't even returned for Aziel's birth. Perhaps he still resented her. She had spent countless sleepless nights crying, rocking her baby in her arms while staring into the empty darkness. "But I can't keep hating him forever." Now we have Azil, a bond between us. He has become a father, and I have become a mother. Even now, I still want to build a real family, at least for the sake of our precious child. Blair waited with rising anticipation, holding Azil in her arms. When he sees how much our son resembles him, surely his heart will soften. But the scene that greeted her shattered that fragile hope. There stood Herden, intimately close to another woman. The servants around them began to murmur, "Who is that woman? He returns after a year with another woman by his side." They arrived in the same carriage. Could that be Lady Miela Elias? Herden spoke calmly, as if offering a simple explanation. She is a priestess. She traveled to the north to train according to the goddess's will, and happened to discover our knights under attack by monsters. She assisted them. I recognized her exceptional abilities and hired her as my assistant for the monster subjugation campaign. She will continue to serve me with absolute loyalty. To him, their relationship was nothing more than that of lord and capable subordinate. Yet the servants whispered endlessly, "I heard Lady Miela will be staying at the estate for some time. Do you think there's something between the Duke and Lady Miela?" The Duke never shows emotion, but it's obvious Lady Miela fancies him. Just look at how close they are. It won't be long before the Duke falls for her, too. A woman who is both beautiful and talented, of course she'd catch his eye. Every whispered word pierced Blair like a knife. Anyone would be better than the daughter of his enemy. She showed no reaction to the rumors. Reacting would only prove they were true. And so the stifling summer passed, giving way to a bleak autumn and then a desolate winter. Herden was always busy. He never sought her out first. Even when she went to see him, he refused to meet her. Eventually, Blair gave up trying to mend their broken relationship. The one small mercy was that he occasionally showed a faint interest in Azil. And on that fragile thread of attention, Blair decided to place her final bet. And so I decided to place my final bet on that faint, fragile thread of interest he showed toward Azil. Blair paced back and forth in her chamber, calculating carefully. Azil's first birthday was only 2 weeks away. Perhaps he would accept a request like this. "Let's go down to the Holstein villa together and spend time as a family." She clenched her fists, silently cheering herself on. Yes, I can do this. Just as she approached the Duke's study, she noticed the door was slightly ajar. The moment she stepped closer, her eyes widened in shock. Through the narrow gap, she saw them, Herden and Miela, locked in a passionate embrace. In that instant, Herden's gaze met hers. Blair froze, staring at him. For a fleeting second, it seemed as though he wanted to explain himself. But instead, he deliberately tightened his arms around Miela, pulling her even closer as if to make his choice unmistakably clear. Miela, still lost in her dreamlike happiness, whispered against his chest, "I love you, Your Grace." The words pierced Blair like a blade. She turned sharply and fled down the corridor, desperate to escape the reality unfolding behind that door. Unable to bear hearing him say those same words to another woman. "I love you." "Your Grace," a maid said gently. "His Grace has informed us that his schedule has been delayed. It seems he won't be able to join you and the young master for the birthday celebration." And so, a few days later, Azil celebrated his first birthday in a modest but warm gathering. It was just the two of them, mother and son, surrounded by cheerful maids and servants who clapped and sang. Gifts from the vassal families piled up, delicious food filled the table, and laughter echoed through the hall. By all accounts, it was a perfect birthday, except the child's father was not there. Blair felt as though her heart had died inside her chest. She cradled her son tenderly, pressing a soft kiss to his forehead. "My precious little one, you look so adorable today. You are so very precious to me." When bedtime came, she carried him to his room. Azil suddenly pointed toward the window with a small sound. "Ah!" Outside, snowflakes drifted endlessly from the dark sky. Blair gazed at the falling snow for a long moment before whispering to her son, "Do you know, sweetheart? Mommy has been waiting for your father all this time." She smiled sadly. "That's right. Today is your birthday, Azil. Daddy will surely come before the day is over." She tucked him in gently and brushed a hand through his soft hair. "Sweet dreams, my love." A few silent tears fell onto the boy's cheek. Azil knew nothing of it. Blair returned to her room like a woman who had lost her soul. Only after making sure her son could no longer see her did she finally let the tears fall freely. They would not stop. She collapsed to the floor, covering her face as the bitterness poured out. That child is at an age where he should only be receiving love from his parents. At the very least, he shouldn't have been abandoned by his own father like this. Why did I ever fall in love with such a cold, indifferent man? If I could go back to the past, I would never love him. I would never love you. At that exact moment, slow, deliberate footsteps approached. Blair looked up in terror. A figure was moving toward her, dagger glinting in the dim candlelight. The words still echoed in her mind. If only I could go back. The winter night made the villa deathly silent. Danger screamed through every nerve in her body. Blair ran with all her strength, her mind desperately denying the truth. It can't be him. It can't be Herden. She couldn't scream. Azil was in the next room. If she made any noise, Azil would wake up. That man must never learn of Azil's existence. Save me. Someone, please save my child. She frantically rang the servant bell, praying desperately for help. The sharp sound cut through the night. In the servants' quarters, a maid frowned. That's coming from her Grace's room. It's so late. Is she having trouble sleeping? Suddenly, her expression changed. Wait, that's not the usual bell. The servants exchanged panicked glances and rushed toward the Duchess's chamber. Blair kept yanking the bell rope even as the blade plunged into her body. The attacker did not stop. He struck again. By the time the servants burst into the room in a frenzy, chaos erupted. Madame, madame! The assassin fled at the sound of the approaching crowd. Breathing had become agony. Even in her final moments, Blair's only thought was of her son. Thank God I didn't let Azil sleep in my room tonight. But the relief was hollow. No, I can't end up like this. She tried to crawl forward. My child, my poor boy needs me. What will happen to him? When the servants finally saw the scene, screams of horror filled the room. In her last moments, Blair blamed only herself. Mother still has so many things she wanted to do for you. Tears of regret slid down her cheeks as she looked toward the direction of her son's room. My good boy. When she finally closed her eyes, the hourglass of time suddenly turned. Blair's eyes flew open in terror. She bolted upright, letting out a raw, anguished scream. Azil! She stared at her own hands, smooth, unblemished, without a trace. What is happening? Wasn't I dead? She shouted desperately, Is anyone there? Where is my son? A maid hurried into the room at the sound of her voice. Your Highness, you're awake. Blair's voice cracked with fear. Lena, where is Azil? Is he safe? Lena blinked in confusion. Azil? Ah, you mean the stray cat that's been hanging around the garden lately? Or perhaps the golden retriever? Blair's eyes reddened with fury and panic. Lena, I'm not in the mood for jokes. Where is my son, Azil? She froze mid-sentence as the wrongness of the situation finally crashed over her. This was the ceiling of the Imperial Palace, far, far away from Holstein Villa. Why am I here? The maid still looked puzzled. Your Highness, what are you talking about? Why would I call you anything else? And a son? Your Highness, you aren't even married yet. Where would a child come from? A ridiculous hypothesis flashed through Blair's mind. Lena, how old am I? Good heavens, Your Highness, you are 20 years old. You only held your coming-of-age ceremony 2 months ago. 3 years. She had returned 3 years into the past, before Azil was born, before her marriage to Herden. Was everything just a dream? Or did I really die and am now reliving my life? The nightmare from last night felt far too vivid. Blair sat in a daze, barely hearing the voices around her. Blair! Princess Blair! Lena called anxiously. The Empress Dowager is calling for you. The woman before her was Empress Dowager Katrina Ardell, her mother. She scolded her with a sharp tone. You've been completely lost in thought for a while now. Katrina turned to her son. Did something happen this morning? The man replied calmly. Nothing of importance. He was Emperor Ivan Ardell, ruler of the Ardell Empire. Blair finally spoke, her voice hollow. I apologize. I had a very frightening dream last night. She forced herself to focus. Where were we? Her brother answered indifferently. We were discussing your marriage to Duke Delmark. Make sure you are fully prepared so there are no mistakes. Blair's eyes widened in shock. The Emperor continued, The matter has already been decided. I have given him suitable incentives and he won't refuse. Don't make that face just because you weren't consulted beforehand. You are the princess of this empire. I trust you won't say anything childish like I hate political marriages, correct? Forgotten memories flooded back like a tidal wave. Everyone had tried to persuade her back then. This is the best match you could possibly hope for. Every woman in the Empire dreams of dancing with the Duke even once. This marriage will mend the relationship between our two families. Consider it an honor. In her previous life, this was the moment she had rebelled for the first time. Blair's lips pressed into a thin line. But this time she answered with eerie calmness, astonishing both the Emperor and the Empress Dowager. If that is your Majesty's will, then I will obey. She had been thinking ever since she woke up. Were those memories just a dream? Or am I the one dreaming now because I died? No matter how many times she examined her surroundings, this was no dream. The sound of a seal calling mother, the warmth of his small body when she held him, his innocent little face. Every detail had felt painfully real. That only made the present feel even more hollow. My child, my hope, my reason for living. Even with this miraculous second chance, the reality remained. Aziel did not exist in this timeline. To Blair, that truth felt like hell itself. That was why, in this second life, Blair finally had a reason to marry Herden. She lifted her hand unconsciously, her fingers gently tracing the empty air as though caressing Aziel's soft cheek. I can do anything if it means I get to see you again. Her eyes softened with lingering sorrow as she pictured her son's face. Even if it meant repeating that unbearably lonely married life, even if it meant enduring the same cold hell she had once escaped through death, there was only one path she needed to take now. While the maids were helping her change, Blair suddenly spoke. Lena, send a messenger to the Delmark Duchy. Tell them I wish to meet the Duke tomorrow. If he is occupied, ask him to propose a convenient date. Lena's eyes widened in pure astonishment. You wish to meet Duke Delmark, Your Highness? Blair tilted her head, confused by the intensity of her reaction. Why do you look so surprised? Lena stammered. Oh, it's nothing, Your Highness. I'll send the messenger immediately. She bowed quickly and slipped out of the room, closing the door gently behind her. Once outside, Lena murmured to herself, I can't believe it. It was perfectly understandable. Only a few months ago, the princess had gone out of her way to avoid the Duke at every single banquet and social gathering. Lena knew the deep-seated hostility between the Delmark ducal house and the imperial family. Blair's father, the late emperor, had two women, his lawful wife, Empress Esmeralda, and consort Katrina. For many years, Empress Esmeralda had been unable to bear a child. That was why Katrina, a woman of humble origins with no power or influence, had been brought into the palace as a consort. But the moment Katrina gave birth to Prince Ivan, opportunists swarmed to her side. The power struggle between Empress Esmeralda and consort Katrina grew vicious, and soon escalated into full-blown political warfare. It was around that time that a little girl had once slipped through the crowd and run to the Empress, calling out affectionately, Your Majesty! Her tiny hands had clutched the Empress's fingers with innocent trust. People said that Empress Esmeralda had genuinely cherished Blair, the daughter of her political rival, until the tragedy struck. The fire at the Empress's palace claimed Esmeralda's life and left the young princess, who had been with her, gravely injured. The shock was said to have caused Blair to lose all memories of that period. The Emperor had launched a thorough investigation into who had tried to harm his daughter. All evidence pointed toward the late Empress Esmeralda. The Delmark family, her maternal relatives, fiercely denied the accusations, but in the end, Esmeralda was buried as a traitor. A servant knocked on the door of the Duke's study. The butler bowed deeply. Your Grace, a message has arrived from the imperial family. Herden Delmark was the sole surviving grandson of the disgraced Empress Esmeralda. In the palace, Lena's heart was in turmoil. His Majesty is truly heartless. The princess was a direct victim of that incident. How could anyone expect her to welcome a marriage like this? Yet as she walked away, she paused and glanced back toward Blair's chambers. Strangely, she could sense that the princess's mood seemed unusually bright. Inside the carriage, a voice rang out sharply. His Majesty is truly shameless. How can he even mention this marriage? He was practically celebrating with a toast while our Delmark family was on the brink of ruin. The aide turned to Herden. Your Grace, are you not angry? It's obvious he intends to swallow your influence whole. Now that you've earned military glory and the people's adoration— Enough, Herden's icy voice cut him off. The aide flinched and bowed his head at once. My apologies, Your Grace. But inwardly he cursed. The princess is the only one who won the lottery. She gets to sit still and claim the greatest husband in the empire without lifting a finger. Meanwhile, Blair remembered the look of shock on Lena's face when she had asked to meet the Duke. She fell into quiet reflection. Of course she was surprised. In the past, she had been so preoccupied with avoiding Hurden at every opportunity. But this time, things would be different. This time, she would marry Hurden without encountering any obstacles. Blair walked slowly toward the drawing room where Hurden waited. The sight of his tall, imposing figure stirred an uneasy ripple in her chest. I cannot leave even the slightest chance that he might refuse to become my husband. She stepped closer and spoke first, her voice steady. Thank you for making time despite your busy schedule, Duke Delmark. Hurden immediately dropped to one knee in a flawless, formal greeting. It is an honor to meet you, Your Highness. He took her hand and pressed a light kiss to the back of it, cold, reluctant, and devoid of any warmth. The mechanical gesture only deepened Blair's quiet pain. She pulled her hand away firmly. Let's get straight to the point. Blair sat down gracefully and wasted no more time. Regarding the marriage proposal my brother, His Majesty, has put forward, I have no intention of refusing it. Hurden's expression remained unreadable, though he clearly already knew this. Yes, he replied coolly. It would be difficult to reject an imperial command. Blair continued without hesitation, laying out her terms. 1 year. Maintain this marriage with me for exactly 1 year. After that, I will initiate the divorce and bear all the blame myself. I will not change my mind, nor will I cling to you. I will not bother you with trivial matters such as love or any similar nonsense. Her voice faltered slightly for the first time. If you accept my proposal, I will cooperate fully in uncovering the truth behind the fire at the Empress's palace from 10 years ago. The offer clearly caught him off guard. Hurden's thick, dark brows drew together. A cold, mocking laugh escaped his lips. Ha! He pressed his lips into a thin line, his face darkening. After all this time? Memories flooded Hurden's mind. The countless letters he had written to her, filled with desperate pleas. Please help me. Your Highness, my aunt was not that kind of person. You know that better than anyone. Your Highness, please clear her name. Please help me. Yet back then, Blair had looked at him with empty eyes and said coldly, I don't remember anything. Those words had pierced him like a spear. The helplessness, the rage, even now 10 years later, the wound had never healed. Liar. He had wanted to scream at her. You're lying when you say you don't remember, aren't you? In the end, you chose to stand with your own family after all. The sense of betrayal and bone-deep resentment still burned inside him. She had kept silent for 10 long years. So what right did she have now to bring it up? Returning to the present, Hurden asked her directly, Why do you want to enter a marriage like this? Blair answered calmly, Because marriage is the only legal way for a princess to leave the imperial palace. If that is your only reason, he said, wouldn't it be better to marry someone who would cherish and love your highness? At the word love, Blair's mind flashed back to the image of her betraying husband from her previous life. Love? She silently set the thought aside. I no longer believe in such things. I don't need empty eternity. Instead, I prefer a relationship with a clear beginning and a clear end. One where I can receive as much as I give. I believe you are capable of that, she added. The two stared at each other in heavy silence. Hurden exhaled softly, remembering a distant conversation. Blair's own voice from years ago echoed in his memory. When I grow up, I want to leave the imperial palace. I'll leave the capital and travel the wide world. When I'm older, will you take me to see the sea? The more he remembered, the tighter his fists clenched in quiet anger. Finally, he spoke. I accept your proposal. In any case, I had no intention of defying the Emperor's command. This marriage would grant him the right to strengthen the Delmark army. His forces had been slashed in half under the excuse of treason. To defend the northern border and suppress the monsters, military reinforcement was essential. Above all, he would finally have the chance to uncover the truth of that day. He didn't know what game the princess was playing, but if he could use her to reveal the past and then divorce her cleanly, it would be the best possible outcome. Hurden rose to his feet, signaling the end of the meeting. If there is nothing else, I shall take my leave. Blair's expression darkened for a brief moment. And one more thing. Hurden paused, slightly surprised. What is it? But Blair shook her head. No, it's nothing. Inside, her heart twisted with unease. Of course, I couldn't get an answer from the Herden of this time. There was one question she simply could not bring herself to ask. Herden, were you the one who killed me? The day before the wedding, Blair visited the late Empress's grave with a small bouquet of flowers. I'm here, Your Majesty. She knelt gently before the tombstone and spoke softly to the woman she considered her mother. After pretending not to remember for 10 years, is it possible you're angry with me? Blair gazed up at the sky in silence. When I was young, I was terrified of regaining those memories. Because no matter what the truth was, I knew I would end up losing a mother. In her previous life, she had tried to confront it for Herden's sake, but it had only destroyed her health further. The harsh words Herden had once thrown at her resurfaced in her mind like needles. So now you want to regain your memories? After staying silent for 10 years, you suddenly feel guilty? Each sentence stabbed deeper. Don't do anything more. Just stay as you are, exactly as you've always been. Returning to the present, Blair realized that nothing would change if she kept avoiding the truth. Suddenly, Lena's voice broke through her thoughts. Your Highness, the Empress Dowager is waiting for you. Lena's face was marked with fresh scratches and bruises. Yet Blair's resolve only hardened. In this life, I will face the truth head-on and move forward, leaving behind all the regrets of the past. The moment she entered the room, a sharp slap cracked across her cheek. How dare you ignore your own mother like this? Katrina roared in fury. What were you thinking? Visiting that woman's grave the day before your wedding? The same woman who tried to kill you? Her venomous words echoed loudly enough for the maids to hear. I am your real mother. I carried you for 9 months and gave birth to you. Blair pressed a hand to her stinging cheek and remained silent. Faint voices from her memories resurfaced. Blair, you must grow up to be a woman who is loved, just like your mother. Think about the miserable end of that unloved woman. Jealousy, envy. What a pitiful, worthless life, destroying herself in the end. From childhood, Blair had been taught that this was maternal love. As a young lady, she endured strict weight control, harsh lessons, and learned exactly how to be lovable. As long as she endured it, the maids wouldn't be punished in her place. There was no reason for her mother to hate her. Everyone would see her as beautiful and graceful. Everyone would love her. But the moment she held newborn Asil in her arms, everything became clear. If she truly loved someone, she wouldn't care more about her son than her own daughter on the eve of her wedding. If she truly loved someone, she wouldn't fail to find her own child's innocent joy in eating adorable. No matter how painful it was, Blair had to admit the truth now. Become a lovable woman. And in doing so, you must become a solid pillar for this imperial family that your brother and I have built. What was being directed at her had never been love. Blair slowly lifted her head and looked her mother in the eyes. Mother, since when have you cared about me so much? Blair's words immediately sent a wave of terror through the maids. They knew exactly what Katrina would do next if provoked. Without hesitation, Katrina raised her hand to strike again. But before the blow could land, Blair spoke coldly. Wouldn't it be troublesome if the bride's face were scarred the day before her wedding? After all, I must remain a solid pillar for this imperial family you and my brother have built. Katrina's hand froze mid-air. She glared at her daughter with pure venom before lowering it. So you finally stabbed a knife into your mother's heart, you insolent girl? Blair remained silent. Now that she had decided to move forward, she would leave all the ugly past behind. She closed her eyes for a brief moment. It hurt. But it also felt strangely liberating. This was the end of a one-sided, miserable love. Snow fell heavily, blanketing the world in white. Inside the Grand Ducal residence, Ivan took Blair's hand and spoke in a low voice. You understand this, don't you? As he led her forward, he offered his cold instructions. A woman must give birth to a son for her husband's family. That is the surest way to secure your position. His expression remained icy as he continued. And as your brother, I have a few words of advice. You're far too stiff for a woman. It's good to be proper, but in the bedroom you need to be more seductive if you wish to be loved. Blair listened in silence to her brother's warnings. He even mentioned Katrina. Mother is very worried about you. The reminder brought back the sting of the slap. Blair lowered her gaze, her voice tinged with quiet melancholy. Please tell Mother that her daughter will be fine, no matter where she is. She doesn't need to concern herself. With that, Ivan escorted her into the wedding hall. The moment she appeared, gasps of awe rippled through the crowd. My goodness, look at the princess. She looks like she descended from heaven itself. She resembles an angel, or perhaps a snow fairy. At the altar, Herden watched her with sharp, piercing eyes. Ivan placed Blair's hand in Herden's and said with calculated warmth, "She has been raised like a precious jewel. Please treat her with the utmost care." Herden took her hand and replied evenly, "How could I possibly go against His Majesty's wishes?" Amid the atmosphere of forced celebration, the officiant's voice rang out clearly. With the blessings of the entire empire, the two were pronounced husband and wife. "May they live in happiness and love forever," the priest proclaimed. Finally, he concluded, "And now for the final part. Please seal your vows with a kiss." Herden slowly lifted Blair's veil, revealing her snow-white, breathtakingly beautiful face. For a fleeting moment, he froze. Snow fairy. A woman dressed in pure, pristine white. The description suited her perfectly. He leaned down and pressed a light, almost hesitant kiss to her lips. Perhaps those compliments were not entirely empty after all. Papers and documents covered the large desk in heavy stacks. A low voice broke the silence. "Let's call it a night here." Rust pushed open the door with a tired sigh, ready to praise his superior, but the words died in his throat. "Your Grace, you're incredible. Truly, no one else could." He froze mid-sentence and let out a startled yelp. "Ah!" Herden stood there like a silent shadow. Rust stammered in shock. "Your Grace? What are you doing here at this hour?" In contrast to his aide's stunned expression, Herden replied calmly, "Do I need a reason to enter my own office?" Rust quickly recovered. "No, that's not what I meant. It's just, isn't tonight your wedding night?" Herden walked past him into the room. "It sounds like you were hoping I wouldn't show up." Rust muttered under his breath. "Of course I was. Who wants to be stuck alone with their boss in the middle of the night on his wedding night?" He looked at Herden with clear unease. "Especially when that boss just got married today and chooses to come to the office instead of his bride's chambers. We'll be lucky if strange rumors don't start spreading," he thought grimly. Seeing Herden already settling down to work, Rust sighed. What a ruthless man, a true workaholic. Still, he asked cautiously, "So, what are your plans from here, Your Grace?" Herden kept his eyes on the documents. She said she would do everything in her power to help restore her memories of the incident from 10 years ago. Rust looked skeptical. "She really said that?" "Yes." Herden's gaze darkened slightly. "I don't know whether she truly lost her memories or if she's pretending for some other purpose." Rust handed him another file, curiosity getting the better of him. "Are you seriously not going to the bedroom?" Herden answered indifferently. "She's probably exhausted and already asleep." Today's schedule was grueling, even for a delicate woman like her. He set his pen down for a moment, then continued in a low voice. "Besides, in a contractual marriage, there's no need to bother with such formalities as a wedding night." Yet even as he spoke, the image of Blair at the altar flashed through his mind, ethereal in white. Herden paused, resting his chin on his hand, a rare flicker of restlessness crossing his thoughts. After a while, when Rust saw him stand up to leave, he asked in surprise, "So you're going after all?" Herden's eyes deepened. I suddenly felt the urge to see what kind of expression that doll-like woman would make when her unwanted husband appears in the middle of the night. Herden opened the door to the Duchess's chambers and stopped short. Blair sat quietly at the desk, bathed in soft lamplight. She looked impossibly small. Even now, the sight struck him. The room was cold, with snow piling up heavily outside the window. In that wintry scene, she appeared like a figure carved from snow itself, pale, fragile, and strikingly beautiful. He approached silently and placed a hand on her shoulder, his voice unexpectedly gentle. "I thought you'd be asleep by now." Blair startled and turned around quickly. "Duke Delmark, when did you arrive?" Seeing her flustered expression, he asked, "Why do you look so startled?" "Isn't tonight our wedding night? Isn't it only natural for a husband and wife to spend it together?" Blair turned her face away, embarrassed. "I didn't think you would come." "Yet here you are, still awake," he noted. "I was just waiting to be prepared," she replied hesitantly. "Since you came, it would be rude of me to go to sleep now." Herden didn't dwell on her words. His gaze shifted to the papers behind her, and he reached out to pick one up. "What is this?" Blair answered softly. "A contract. Since this is a contractual marriage, I thought it best to put everything in writing." Blair watched Hurden nervously as he picked up the document and began reading it aloud in his deep, resonant voice. Article 1. The signatory, Blair Sonic von Ardel, shall exert every effort to assist in uncovering the truth behind the fire at the Empress's palace. The duration of this contract is 1 year. However, regardless of time passed, this marriage contract shall immediately terminate once the truth of the incident is revealed. Responsibility for the incident shall be determined in accordance with imperial law. Article 2. During the term of this contract, both parties shall treat each other with the respect befitting husband and wife. This respect includes fulfilling spousal duties while keeping the other's honor in mind. For example, sharing at least one meal together per week and attending important banquets and events as a couple. Perhaps I shouldn't have written that part, Blair thought silently. She had unconsciously poured out the bitterness of being neglected in her previous life. After finishing, Hurden looked up and asked, "And if one party fails to uphold the terms of the contract, what will you do?" Blair hesitated for a moment, then her eyes brightened as the answer came to her. "Of course, there needs to be some form of penalty or no one will take it seriously." She lifted her gaze to meet his and declared firmly, "If you fail to follow what is written in this contract, I will not divorce you." Hurden froze for a second, then let out a low, surprised sound, almost like a soft laugh. For a fleeting moment, her threat seemed oddly endearing. Blair eyed him suspiciously. Did he just smirk, or was I imagining it? Hurden's eyes then caught another line. He read it out loud, his voice growing lower. "For this reason, if one party desires to share a bed, the other party must fulfill their conjugal duties up to a maximum of twice per month." He set the paper down and stepped closer, looming over her with a predatory glint in his eyes. "When you wrote share a bed, you weren't referring to simply holding hands and sleeping, were you?" His voice dropped to a suggestive whisper. "Are you proposing to play the role of a warm bed companion for me?" Blair's face flushed crimson. "Don't say it like that," she cried out in embarrassment. In her mind, she thought desperately, "I need a justifiable reason for when I become pregnant with Aziel." She turned her face away, answering vaguely, "I simply want us to be harmonious with each other, at least until then." Hurden repeated her words in a deep, husky tone. "Harmonious?" He moved even closer, backing her against the desk. "In that case, shouldn't I begin fulfilling my spousal duties according to the contract right now?" Blair gripped the edge of the desk tightly, her knuckles turning white. Right now, she had never imagined Hurden would be the one to demand fulfillment of that particular clause first. She turned her face away, avoiding his intense gaze. We don't have to consummate the marriage on the very first night." Hurden leaned in closer, his breath brushing against her lips. His voice was low and rough with desire. "I want to." His eyes sharpened with unmistakable hunger. "Right now." Before she could respond, Hurden captured her mouth in a fierce, possessive kiss. The wedding night dissolved into heated passion. The Duke pressed the delicate woman down onto the bed, his deep kisses growing longer, more demanding, laced with raw possession. Yet deep in her heart, Blair knew the truth clearly. This was not love. It was nothing more than a fleeting moment of lust. She had seen this body countless times in her previous life, so why did everything feel so strangely new now? Perhaps it was the expression on his face. When he noticed her trembling, Hurden's voice dropped to a husky whisper. "Don't hide from me like that. It makes me feel like some bastard forcing his wife instead of sharing a proper marital bed." Looking at her fragile form, he was tempted to let go and lose himself completely in her. But he quickly suppressed the urge. If I do that, this delicate woman might shatter. He could not risk losing such a crucial witness to the events of that year simply because of his own desires. Her skin glowed like moonlight, her violet eyes shimmered with unshed tears, and her red, swollen lips trembled as they whispered his name. Hurden had to admit she was breathtakingly beautiful. So beautiful that, for one dangerous moment, he nearly forgot whose daughter she was. He caught himself and cursed inwardly. The next morning, Blair stirred awake. The space beside her on the bed was cold and empty. Unlike her previous life, when Hurden had stayed until dawn, using her body while probing for the truth, this time he had left without a single word. Recalling her past naivety and how foolishly she had trusted him, Blair smiled bitterly to herself. Don't forget, Blair, he doesn't love you. Not long after, Lena, her personal maid, was brushing Blair's long hair while grumbling nonstop about the Duke's cruelty. How could he abandon his bride on their wedding night? It's utterly heartless. Blair replied gently, I'm fine, Lena. Honestly, I prefer sleeping alone. But Lena would not be deterred. She launched into passionate lectures on love she had learned from her beloved romance novels, urging her mistress not to simply endure life in this cold, unfamiliar ducal estate filled with strangers. Suddenly, a bright red magic circle flared to life right in front of Blair's chest. She startled violently. Lena immediately asked in alarm, but Blair quickly regained her composure and waved it off. It's nothing. At that moment, her gaze fell on Lena's hands, heavily wrapped in bandages. Though the maid laughed it off and quickly hid them, claiming she had been clumsy and cut herself while working that morning, Blair didn't believe her for a second. In her previous life, she had been so consumed by her own tragedies that she had completely overlooked Lena, the only person who had given up everything to follow her to this hostile place. Those cuts were clearly from a knife. Yet Lena had never been assigned to kitchen duty. A dark suspicion rose in Blair's mind. Could it be that the servants here are bullying her? Once her hair was finished, Lena smiled brightly and encouraged her. Please try to live harmoniously in this house, Your Grace. And if possible, make that handsome Duke shed a few tears for you. Following Lena's escort, Blair stepped into the dining room. The moment the doors opened, her eyes fell on Herden's tall, commanding figure seated at the head of the long table. He radiated an aura of cold authority. He looked up with his deep, piercing gaze fixed on his newly wedded wife. In a calm, even voice that betrayed no emotion, he asked, Did you sleep well last night? Once she was seated, Herden continued cutting his beefsteak with refined precision while speaking indifferently. After breakfast, the butler will introduce you to the estate's staff. Once the maids have finished their formal greetings, he will give you a tour of the residence. If there is nothing else, you may rest afterward. Feel free to ask if you have any questions. Blair went straight to the point. How do you plan to investigate the fire from 10 years ago? Herden paused mid-motion and looked up. Since you claim you remember nothing about the incident, I will arrange for a hypnotist. Blair hesitated slightly. I've tried that method several times before. It didn't work. Herden replied coolly, Perhaps this time will be different. The atmosphere instantly grew heavy. Are you doubting me? She asked. How can I trust you? Herden answered bluntly. Whether you truly lost your memories or are merely pretending for some hidden purpose, only you know the truth. He emphasized, My acceptance of this contract does not mean I trust you. This has always been a marriage built on calculation and exchange, not love or faith. Understanding her position clearly, Blair realized she needed to dispel his suspicions. She nodded. I will try. After the meal, the butler, Mason, personally guided her on a tour of the estate. He introduced every corner with calm professionalism, from the grand library to the sunlit drawing room that the Duke favored, and even the rare tree gifted by the imperial family that stood outside the window. As she walked beside the diligent old butler, Blair thought to herself that she already knew every detail by heart from her previous life. Seeing and hearing everything again brought back a flood of old memories. When the sky began to tint with the colors of dusk, Mason bowed and apologized for keeping her too long. He had been overly eager and forgotten how exhausting the previous day's wedding must have been for her. Blair offered a small smile. It's all right. She then requested the full list of estate personnel and the asset inventory ledgers. Maison looked momentarily surprised and offered to handle the work himself so she wouldn't be burdened, but she refused firmly. I am now a member of the Delmark family. Am I not allowed to fulfill my duties as Duchess? Her quiet determination brought a rare, faint smile to the usually stern old butler's face. He bowed in approval. As she watched his retreating back, Blair told herself silently, In my previous life, I was too afraid of the cold eyes of the ducal household and never dared involve myself in managing the estate. But this time is different. I no longer care what anyone thinks. Even if she would only be Duchess for 1 year, she would carry out her responsibilities perfectly. Blair sat quietly in her chamber, meticulously outlining her plans for the future. She had proposed a 1-year contractual marriage with Herden. However, the truth was that she had become pregnant with Azil around the beginning of summer in her previous life. Herden must never learn of the child's existence. That meant she had only 6 months to resolve everything before her pregnancy became obvious. There were 3 critical matters she needed to handle. First, recovering her memories of the palace fire 10 years ago. Herden was already taking charge of this, so she could set it aside for now. Second, preparing for the divorce. In this empire, divorce required the emperor's approval. The man who had forced her into this marriage to target Herden would never agree if the fault lay with his side. Therefore, the blame had to fall entirely on her. The most effective way to force his hand was to create a scandalous affair. In such a case, one man would not be enough. He would be punished for committing adultery with a princess. But if there were multiple men, the weight of public condemnation would fall solely on the promiscuous princess, her. And if Aziel's existence were ever exposed, she could simply claim the child belonged to one of them. To achieve this, she would first need to buy the loyalty of several men. Of course, with such a disgraceful scandal, she would no longer be able to remain in the capital. She might even face the risk of being imprisoned by the emperor or the empress dowager. The moment the divorce was finalized, she would have to flee immediately. She needed a new identity and a safe place where no one could find her. It seems I'll need to visit the Merchants Guild soon. And the final, most important task, identifying the mastermind who had ordered her murder before her regression. It was highly unlikely the assassin had acted purely out of personal grudge. Someone powerful was pulling the strings, and she had to discover why they had targeted her. Because in this life, Blair refused to let her child live in loneliness again. Everything would begin with what was closest to her. The knight's training session tomorrow morning. Lost in her calculations, Blair suddenly remembered that the contract from the previous night was still incomplete. She picked up the document and walked down the quiet hallway toward Herden's chambers. She knocked softly. From inside came his deep, low voice. "Mason, come in." Blair carefully pushed the door open. "Forgive me for coming so late. I just realized we hadn't finished signing the contract yesterday." Before she could finish speaking, she froze. Herden stood before her with damp black hair still glistening from his bath. His thin silk robe hung loosely open, revealing the firm, sculpted lines of his chest. The air in the room felt suddenly thick and stifling. Blair stood rooted in place, clutching the rolled-up document to her chest like a lifeline. Herden's eyes darkened as he watched her. In his gaze, she appeared both naively innocent and stubbornly determined. He extended his hand. "Give it here. I'll sign it quickly so you can go rest." But the moment the pen touched the paper, Blair spoke up softly. "Wait, Herden. You need to read the contract carefully again." Herden frowned slightly. "Didn't we already go over it yesterday?" Blair's hands were ice cold. She hesitated before answering. "Who knows? What if I changed a few clauses since then?" Herden stared at her in silence. Is the mouse worrying about the cat now? She took a deep breath and admitted honestly, "I added one more condition. When this contract ends, she wanted him to write a letter of recommendation for her maid Lena, so the girl could find a better position elsewhere." Herden raised an eyebrow. "You mean that personal maid you brought from the Imperial Palace?" When she nodded, his gaze turned sharply cold. "So she plans to abandon even her most trusted attendant? Is she preparing to run away with some secret lover?" Scandals involving unequal marriages and secret affairs were not uncommon. Still, after a brief pause, Herden signed the document without further comment. "It's none of my business anyway. It's quite late. Once this is settled, you should rest." Before leaving, Blair reminded him, "Don't forget about tomorrow's luncheon at the Imperial Palace." She added firmly, "You don't need to accompany me to every event, but when it involves my brother or the Imperial family, I expect you to be present. As my husband, you are not allowed to make any mistakes. Because when this contract ends, my brother will have no choice but to approve the divorce." Herden let out a quiet, almost impressed sigh. "What a cunning woman." Blair turned to leave. "Good night." The moment the door closed behind her, Herden let out a heavy sigh and rubbed his forehead. He had come here to clear his chaotic thoughts, yet she had sought him out herself. She had no idea that his mind had been consumed by dark, dangerous thoughts about her all day long. He couldn't stop remembering the previous night, the sweet, bottomless swamp she had pulled him into, the dizzying pleasure of her body, the way she had clung to him desperately, gasping with every breath. And yet, after all of that, she had dared to come to his room wearing nothing but a thin nightgown that left almost nothing to the imagination. Herden smiled bitterly. What he had drunk out of curiosity was not clear spring water, but salty seawater. The more he drank, the thirstier he became. He reminded himself harshly, "She is the one I must hate. She is the daughter of my mortal enemy. A woman I am supposed to despise. He could never allow himself to forget that. Reflecting on his own loss of control, Herden wondered if he had truly gone mad. I am not some rutting dog, but he has to use his left hand this night. The next morning, while frost still clung to the ground, the training grounds echoed with the sharp clash of blades. Herden trained as if venting his fury. His sword swung with ferocious power, sending knight after knight crashing to the ground. Killing intent radiated from him like a storm. The soldiers whispered among themselves in confusion. Who could have possibly angered the Duke so early in the morning? They hadn't even seen him since the wedding. One knight muttered, "He must be furious about being forced to marry the daughter of his enemy. That's why he's taking it out on us." Another turned to Rust, the Duke's aide. "You're his closest aide. Do you know what's going on?" Rust could only break out in a cold sweat, unable to answer. Just then, Blair appeared on the training field accompanied by Butler Mason. The moment he saw her, Herden tossed his sword aside and strode over. "My lady, what brings you here?" Blair replied gently, "I greeted the servants yesterday, but I haven't yet had the chance to meet the knights. I thought I should come and introduce myself before we head to the palace." The knights' eyes were filled with suspicion and open hostility as they stared at her. Rust understood their reaction immediately. These men were Herden's battle-hardened comrades who had survived life-and-death situations with him on the battlefield. Their loyalty to the Duke only fueled their hatred toward the imperial family. Is this new duchess truly naive or simply foolish? At Herden's command, the knights reluctantly bowed in greeting. Blair smiled gracefully and returned the courtesy. "I look forward to receiving your support." But deep in her eyes, a cold, calculating light gleamed as she scanned every face. She already knew exactly what they thought of her. There was no need to win them over or work hard to earn their approval. The real reason she had come here was because the person who had killed her in her previous life might very well be hiding among these men. The Delmark ducal house was one of the 3 great ducal families of the empire. Their knights were hardened veterans whose skills rivaled even those of the imperial knights. Whoever had breached the tight security to assassinate her before must have either possessed exceptional martial prowess or been someone who could move freely within the estate without raising suspicion. In other words, the killer was almost certainly someone inside this very household. That was also why she had once suspected Herden as the mastermind behind it. Blair narrowed her eyes, carefully scanning the crowd. The horrifying memory of that night resurfaced. The assassin who had attacked her bore a hideous scar running across the bridge of his nose. After observing the knights training on the field, she concluded quietly that none of them carried such a scar. At least the killer was not among these men. Does this mean the possibility of Herden's involvement in my death has decreased? While she was lost in thought, Rust approached to remind her that it was time to depart for the imperial palace. Suddenly, her gaze lingered on the beads of sweat glistening on the Duke's forehead. She gently offered him a handkerchief. "Be careful not to catch a cold." Herden merely gave her a cold glance before turning away. "I'm fine." Rust, watching the exchange, couldn't hide his surprise. He had expected the Duke to brush her off harshly, yet the scene between them looked strangely like that of a newlywed couple. At that moment, a small boy came running from nowhere and tripped, falling hard right at Blair's feet. Rust's face paled in horror as he rushed forward to apologize. In his mind, he was panicking. Nobles were infamous for flying into rages over the slightest inconvenience, especially the daughter of the notorious Empress Dowager Katrina. He hurriedly explained that the child belonged to one of the families in the outer quarters and must have wandered off while his mother was working. Contrary to everyone's expectations, Blair showed no anger at all. She knelt down gracefully, helped the boy to his feet, and asked softly if he was hurt. When she learned his name was Jeremy, a warm, radiant smile bloomed on her face. She gently stroked his head and praised him. "You didn't even cry when you fell. What a brave little boy you are." Her genuine, heartfelt smile left Rust blushing and even caused Herden to freeze for a moment. She was a woman who rarely showed emotion. No one had expected her smile to be so breathtakingly beautiful. The atmosphere inside the imperial palace was one of opulent splendor, laced with palpable tension. The emperor raised his wineglass, offering praise with a satisfied smile. "What a perfect match you two make." He did not hesitate to remind his sister of her duty. "You must work hard to give the Delmark family 3 strong heirs." His tone was smug, as though he had just gained thousands of new allies. He then smoothly shifted the conversation to trade with the eastern continent. A new sea route had been opened, sparking a surge in commerce. To gain proper access to the eastern lands, they needed to maintain close ties with the kingdoms there. Wouldn't it be wonderful if we could open a direct sea path for active trade? The emperor turned to Herden. What are your thoughts, Duke? Herden listened in silence, his eyes growing colder by the second. He understood the emperor's ambition all too clearly. The man wanted to break through the gateway and seize control of the ports leading to the eastern continent. Now that he held the empire's strongest piece, the greatest swordmaster, his desire was unmistakable. He wanted war. No wonder he approved my request to reinforce the army so easily, Herden thought. A man who had never truly tasted the horrors of battle viewed war like a game of chess, believing he could snap his fingers and devour the opponent's pieces. Herden had intended to brush off the foolish idea, but before he could respond, Blair spoke up. Husband, you must not allow war to happen. She looked straight into her brother's eyes, her voice firm and resolute. War leaves scars that can never be healed, for both victor and vanquished. My husband and the people of this empire are not your pawns. Please do not drag him into battle merely to serve your own ambitions. The moment her words fell, the Empress Dowager slammed her hand on the table and shouted, Blair! How dare you interfere in His Majesty's and the Duke's affairs? What gives you the right to be so insolent in front of our guests? And what would you know about politics anyway? Katrina's words dripped with venom as she belittled her own daughter. But then a large, steady hand grasped Blair's. I see nothing wrong with what my wife has said, Herden declared calmly. Before she is a sister, she is a subject of this empire. How can a simple discussion about the empire's interests be considered rude? Katrina glared furiously. Duke, I am merely disciplining my daughter. Do not interfere. Herden did not yield. He met her gaze directly. As the saying goes, a daughter who marries is like water thrown out. She is now Blair Delmark. Other than myself, who has the right to point out her shortcomings? He then turned to the emperor and skillfully rejected the proposal with the most reasonable excuse. I will consider the matter again after my wife and I have enjoyed our honeymoon a little longer. Herden pulled Blair into his arms, his expression perfectly crafted with feigned affection and indulgence. As your majesty said, the Delmark family has very few heirs, doesn't it, my lady? The carriage ride back from the palace was steeped in suffocating silence. Blair finally broke it with a soft, sincere thank you. Herden's face remained ice cold. I didn't do it to earn your gratitude. I simply despise the imperial family. Even so, Blair lowered her head and apologized earnestly. I'm sorry for letting my mother and brother's greed use you. Deep in her heart, this apology was not only for the present. It carried the heavy, lingering guilt that had festered in her soul since her previous life. Even as resentment welled up inside her to the breaking point, exhaustion finally claimed her. Blair drifted into a deep, dreamless sleep. The carriage suddenly jolted violently. Blair lost her balance and fell straight into Herden's firm embrace. The Duke looked down at the fragile woman in his arms, his mind swirling with turbulent thoughts. He had once wanted to see her always expressionless face crumble. He had deliberately spoken cruel words and drawn clear boundaries to show his hostility. Yet now, seeing the light fade from her eyes, his blood boiled with inexplicable rage. He realized the absurdity of his own emotions. If anyone has the right to make her cry, to make her suffer, to ultimately destroy her, it should be me. When Blair awoke under the glow of the setting sun, she was startled to find herself being carried in Herden's arms. She squirmed in embarrassment. When did I fall asleep? Please put me down. But the Duke merely replied indifferently, It's too much trouble, just stay still. As soon as they entered the residence, they saw Marcel, the hypnotist Herden had gone to great lengths to find, already waiting for them. Looking at the middle-aged man, Blair thought silently, the time has finally come to face the true purpose of this contractual marriage. She glanced at Herden, who was leaning against the wall. Herden, if you're busy, you can leave me here and attend to your own matters. He rejected the suggestion immediately. Digging up painful memories will be extremely agonizing. As your husband, shouldn't I stay by your side until the end? Blair smiled bitterly in her heart. That's not the real reason. How could he possibly trust me? Herden signaled Marcel to begin. The pendulum swung steadily before Blair's eyes. The hypnotist's calm, deep voice gradually pulled her consciousness back through time, to the day of the fire at the Empress's palace 10 years ago. In her trance, Blair saw herself as a 10-year-old girl secretly slipping away from her mother to visit the Empress. There, she was warmly welcomed with hot cocoa, played cards happily with the maids, and eventually fell asleep. Marcel gently guided her. "Open your eyes. What do you see around you?" She murmured. "It's pitch black? There's nothing but dresses. I think I'm inside a wardrobe." Both Marcel and Herdine broke out in a cold sweat. According to the records, the princess had been found in the hallway. Realizing this was the starting point of her lost memories, he began pressing her to step out. But in her subconscious, Blair shook her head frantically. "I can't go out. I absolutely cannot go outside." The acrid smell of smoke began seeping through the cracks of the door. Marcel continued urging her, demanding she open the door at all costs. Blair cried out in despair. "The door is locked! I can't open it!" She gasped in suffocating agony. "Save me, I can't breathe." Seeing her tormented expression, Herdin's eyes darkened with fury. "Stop," he ordered. But Marcel, like a fanatic standing before the gates of truth, ignored the command entirely. He shouted, "You must break through the wall of your subconscious. Open the door if you want to live." Unable to endure another second, Herdin lunged forward, grabbed Marcel by the collar, and lifted him off the ground. Killing intent blazed in the Duke's eyes. "I said stop. Wake her up. Now." Herdin carried Blair back to her room, holding her close. "Wake up, Blair! Wake up!" His urgent voice tore through the smoke-filled haze of her memories. Blair jolted awake, her eyes wide with terror and brimming with tears. She sobbed, calling his name, then collapsed into a violent coughing fit. Herdin quickly pulled her fragile body into his arms, holding her tightly. His voice softened as he comforted her. "Breathe slowly. Deep breaths." Blair clutched the front of his shirt with trembling fingers and whispered hoarsely, "Just now I heard a faint voice outside the wardrobe. I couldn't make out the words clearly, but I'm sure that in the next session I'll be able to step out and find out what happened." Herdin's expression hardened. Even at a moment like this, she's still thinking about that? Misreading his irritation, Blair looked at him with pained eyes. "Are you angry because I couldn't endure it longer? Next time I'll try to hold on a little more." Her foolish words struck Herdin like a bucket of ice water. He suppressed his anger and replied coldly, "Just rest easy. I'll make sure this doesn't affect our contract." As he stepped out of the room, Herdin ran a hand through his hair in frustration. The contract again. His temporary wife seemed determined to bet her very life on this one-year deal. Herdin immediately ordered his aide to throw out the incompetent hypnotist and find a more capable replacement. At the same time, he summoned Blair's personal maid, Lena, to his study. Standing before the imposing Duke, Lena trembled from head to toe. Did he somehow hear me secretly cursing him for abandoning his wife on their wedding night? Herdin, however, paid no attention to her nervousness. He went straight to the point. "I noticed that the fireplace in Blair's room is always extinguished, even when it's snowing heavily outside. Is she afraid of fire?" Lena nodded quickly. She explained that she only dared to light the fireplace to warm the room when Blair was away, and had to put it out the moment her mistress returned. Although Blair had never said it outright, the trauma from the fire 10 years ago still haunted her. Even her occasional coughing fits were lingering after effects from that incident, which had severely weakened her respiratory system. Herdin's eyes darkened as he listened. He finally understood the root of her fear. The next morning, Blair fell ill. The physician diagnosed that the severe psychological shock had drastically weakened her immune system, leaving her in this condition. Sitting on the edge of the bed, Herdin gazed at her flushed face, burning with fever. He gently brushed his fingers across her sweat-dampened forehead. So this is how fragile she truly is, he thought. I didn't expect her to be this delicate. She barely meets the standards of an ordinary person's health. Thanks to the fever-reducing medicine, her breathing gradually stabilized. But then, from her dry, cracked lips came a soft, delirious murmur. Asil. Herdin froze. The unfamiliar name instantly triggered a chain of dark suspicions in his mind. So that's why she's so obsessed with the contract. He coldly pieced everything together and reached his own conclusion. If she has a lover she cherishes so deeply that she's willing to endure those horrific memories just to fulfill the contract, then everything makes sense. Her earlier declaration that she didn't believe in love had merely been a lie to conceal her true purpose. Herdin stood up abruptly and turned away. He told himself he couldn't care less about whatever fool had dared to engage in a forbidden romance with the princess. But the fact that this fool shared the same name as one of the Delmark family's ancestors was particularly irritating. After that, the basin of warm water was taken out of Blair's room. The maid's hand was wrapped in bandages from the bullying she had endured earlier. To her, caring for Blair was a duty she could not neglect. Fortunately, Blair's fever had broken, and she would likely recover by tomorrow morning. Lena figured she would brush the Duchess's hair again in the morning. While lost in thought, she ran into two other maids coming the opposite way. One of them expressed fake sympathy for Lena having to work so late. The young maid knew the Duchess had fallen ill and felt quite panicked. The other maid reminded Lena to take care of her own health, noting that Lena's workload had been far too heavy lately. She shot her a sideways glance and sneered, "To heal that wound faster, you'd better watch where you're going next time. If you fall again, there probably won't be a single intact spot left on your body." Lena immediately recalled their vicious demeanor from the other day. They had never been kind to her. It was these two who had tripped her, causing her to drop and shatter the vase in her hands. Lena had lost her balance and fallen into those razor-sharp shards. Her hands trembling and still aching, Lena remained silent. She stood there alone. Having followed Blair to this castle, she had no one to defend her. Herdine was not yet resting. In his study, an assistant handed him a luxurious catalogue. "My lord, Countess Sionel has sent the sample catalogue." Herdine, about to take off his coat, gave it an indifferent glance. "Ah, that's right. The New Year's festival is approaching, isn't it?" "Yes." She said to select the fabric for the Duchess's dress first. She mentioned she would order rare fabrics. Herdine gazed intently at the fashion samples, but his mind was still plagued by frustration over the name Azil that Blair had deliriously called out earlier. He was so irritated that he had to close his eyes to calm himself. Herdine then handed the catalog back to his assistant with a curt instruction. "Whatever will do." The assistant's eyes widened in confusion, unsure of how to proceed. Herdine added a specific instruction. "Tell her to choose the warmest fabric and don't worry about the price." Hearing that, it was obvious enough who those fabrics were meant for. Before long, following the Duke's orders, the clothing items were laid out before them, luxurious fabrics stacked high. Madame Sionel cheerfully announced that she had selected a fabric that was both warm and lightweight. With the refined eye of an experienced designer, she praised, "His Grace must have been very worried that the Duchess might fall ill again. You've only just recovered, haven't you?" she asked Blair. But in response to that warmth, Blair wasn't fully listening. She noted that her maid hadn't been present the entire morning. Blair also thanked the designer for her wedding dress from before. It was fortunate that she visited just as Blair recovered, allowing her to express her gratitude in person. Madame Sionel sincerely said it was an honor to design for the most beautiful woman in the empire, especially for these post-wedding garments. She suggested picking out a dress design right away, but Blair was too busy worrying about Lena. Madame Sionel finally finished her work and headed for the door, not forgetting to smile brightly and promise to return with the completed dress for our Duchess. Blair glanced at the unfamiliar maid beside her. The old woman's cold expression made Blair even more anxious. She asked where Lena had gone. "I haven't seen her since she helped me change." The maid gave a faint smile and replied, "I'm not sure. Should I go look for her?" Blair didn't trust the woman. She picked up her fur coat. No need. She draped the coat over herself and walked toward the door, much to the maid's curiosity. "Are you going for a walk?" Blair declined any company. "I'll go alone." She stepped outside, the biting cold making Blair feel more awake. In the freezing air, she looked faint and lonely. Blair glanced around, her face etched with worry. She deliberately searched for Lena among the servants, but there was no sign of her anywhere. Instead of Lena serving her today, a replacement had been sent. Suddenly, she thought of Lena's bandaged hand. Something wasn't right. Blair's face grew pale with fear. She stopped behind a group of maids who were gossiping about Lena. "Hey, where's Lena? Don't tell me she's hiding somewhere crying?" They sneered at each other. "No way. She hasn't even slept. She's off washing up. Just like her master, equally stubborn. Though getting rid of that stench will take some effort." "Listen, I hope she doesn't go running to her master to tattle, right?" "If she was going to do that, she would have done it ages ago," they reassured each other. Suddenly, Lena spotted Blair from behind and called out, "Duchess!" Blair's eyes were so filled with fury that she looked like she had lost her soul. Lena asked worriedly, Why are you standing at the door? Blair's eyes were welling up with tears. Lena would never have endured such treatment before. Blair painfully realized that she had been suffering in silence just to protect her master's reputation. She must have done the exact same thing in their past life. Blair felt a wave of remorse. Another thing. Something I failed to fix because I was too busy wallowing in my own misery. She hurriedly grabbed Lena's hand. Then she pulled Lena right in front of those maids and shouted loudly, "Apologize!" Realizing the Duchess's presence, the maids cowered in fear. Blair repeated, "I told you to apologize to Lena." The oldest among them looked at Blair with disdain and replied, "Duchess, I don't understand what you're talking about. Have we committed some sort of mistake?" Our Blair remembered that she was both a princess and a duchess, wielding considerable authority. Now, she finally put her status to use. A resounding slap landed on that sly old woman's face with all her might. It was the first time she had ever hit someone. The sheer brutality of it made her disgusted with herself. She almost threw up. Kind-hearted Blair felt like she was turning dark and vicious like her mother, and the thought terrified her. Yet she chose to fight to protect Lena instead of letting her suffer on her behalf. Blair glared fiercely. "You know exactly what I'm talking about." Lena, who had been trembling with fear this whole time, hurriedly grabbed her arm. "Duchess, I'm really fine, truly. If this gets blown out of proportion..." Blair cut Lena off. "No." Tears streamed down her face as she could no longer hold back. "It's not fine at all." She turned to her poor maid. "I absolutely loathe that you have to endure this kind of treatment because of me." Just then, a cold, authoritative man's voice rang out as he approached them. "What's going on here?" It was Herdine walking toward them. The noises echoing all the way down the hallway. The maid who had just taken Blair's slap held her face and groaned, "Grand Duke!" She thought she would receive her master's protection. But the way Herdine was glaring didn't look very favorable for her. He paid no attention whatsoever to anyone other than his wife, who was sobbing uncontrollably. Furthermore, he carefully observed her reddened hand and noticed that Blair seemed to be in pain. A low growl escaped Herdine's lips. The maid immediately fell to her knees and begged, "My lord." Feigning a tone of wrongful accusation, she argued, "The Duchess seems to have misunderstood. This girl didn't complete her assigned duties, so I punished her." She cried loudly, and yet she dared to be insolent. The fabricated story poured out just like any other workplace drama. But Herdine finally looked down and said, "I wasn't asking you." That deathly glare sent a chill down the old woman's spine, silencing her act entirely. Blair spoke up. "I punished them. These girls bullied and humiliated the maid I brought with me." The rest of the maids stood frozen, not daring to argue further. Only the old woman who had been looking down on Blair all along was certain that no matter what, the Duke would never side with the daughter of his enemy. She glared sideways at the Duchess with an insolent look, cursing inwardly, "She should know her place." But Herdine's words left everyone in shock. He spoke to his wife and no one else. "This is my fault for not disciplining my subordinates properly. I will deal with these women immediately." The maid was truly terrified now. Lena, the main character of this drama, was so scared her heart nearly leapt out of her chest. She hurriedly pleaded, "My lord, it's fine. Everyone was just joking around a bit. It's part of getting to know each other." Lena turned to Blair and begged, "Isn't that right, Duchess?" She wanted to protect her master's reputation to the very end. Blair replied wearily and reluctantly, "Well, I was indeed angry, but I think such a punishment is too harsh. If they made a mistake, if they were kicked out of the Duke's estate, their futures would be miserable. A sincere apology and docking half this month's pay is enough." Herdine calmly looked at the trembling maids on the ground without an ounce of pity. They were shamelessly wailing and begging for forgiveness. Herdine didn't make things any harder for them. He coldly ordered, "You should apologize to my wife and this maid, not me." He glanced toward his assistant. "Tell Mason to dock 2 months of their pay." Blair looked at him, wanting to plead for them. "Herdine," but he casually replied as he took off his gloves, "I believe this punishment is already quite lenient for them." His assistant urged him, "All right, my lord, it's time to go." Herdine replied, "Right away." He stepped closer and placed a gentle kiss on his wife's forehead. The hand that had just removed the glove patted her shoulder reassuringly. He said in a deep voice, "I have to go now. See you later." Blair was so astonished that her sadness completely vanished. Herdine walked past the maids, casting a brief, murderous glare at them, then instructed politely, "This woman is my wife, so do not let this happen again." Blair stood dazed. This was truly a warning to everyone in the estate, not just to them. She watched his back as he walked out the main doors. Herdine had actually believed her. But why? She looked at her throbbing hand, wondering why she felt this emptiness instead of relief. She clenched her hand tightly as a way to calm herself down. And so, the incident passed peacefully. Lena strode down the hallway, her heart aching for Blair's delicate hand that had just been bruised. Lena felt miserable, never expecting her to hit someone with hands that had never done any hard labor. The way Blair, with her noble status, had cried over Lena's bandaged hand moved her endlessly. Feeling both touched and sorrowful for her master, Lena looked down gloomily. "My lady, I'm here, I'm coming in," Lena called out at the door while carrying a basin of water. As soon as she reached the door, she began to babble. "I think it would be better if you soaked your hand in cold water." Suddenly, Lena panicked and dropped the basin of water she had carefully brought over. The poor maid's voice trembled. "Your Highness the Princess?" Out on the balcony, Blair looked back at Lena. She looked genuinely cool in her black cloak. Before she could reply, Lena rushed over and hugged her tightly, preventing Blair from jumping. It took her a lot of effort to finally utter, "You misunderstand. Let go of me first." Lena didn't hear her clearly and wailed, "No, I won't let go. If you commit suicide, I'll die with you." Blair struggled and cried out softly, "That's not it." But Lena's rescue mission didn't stop. "No, I won't listen to anything you say unless you step back inside. Hurry up and get inside." Little Blair was lifted up like a cat, as usual. She was completely powerless against those who were stronger. Blair gasped, "Quiet, Lena. I have to go somewhere secretly. That's why I'm climbing down this way." Lena finally snapped out of it. "What?" "This is madness. What if you fall and get hurt? It's only the second floor, but still, there are bushes down there." Blair confidently presented her flimsy rope ladder invention. "I've planned this very carefully, so you don't have to worry." Lena stared dumbfoundedly at her princess. To her, Blair was an elegant girl. However, she was occasionally stubborn to the point of madness. Lena demanded, "Then where the hell are you planning to go at this hour?" And so their adventure began, in a carriage that was already waiting for them. Lena poked her head out to observe and guessed where they had stopped. "This bustling street even at night. Is this the Merchant Guild District?" Blair stepped out of the carriage and instructed, "It's the building right in front. I'll be right back." Lena was so scared she was on the verge of tears. "If you don't come out in 30 minutes, I'm going in to find you. I mean it." Blair stayed silent, waving her hand as a signal of agreement. She was full of excitement for her plan. The massive signboard hanging on the building clearly read, "Liberius Guild." Blair knew quite a bit. Rumor had it that they boasted top-tier earnings. Since Herdine was looking for a new hypnotherapist, the restoration of her memories would be delayed for a while. It was a good time, Blair thought, as she reached out to open the door and stepped inside. She assessed the rowdy crowd around her while calculating her divorce plans during this time frame. A young noble woman stepping into the tavern inevitably drew attention. Her delicate and gorgeous face, revealed beneath her cloak's hood, left the crowd of men stunned. They stared wide-eyed, completely forgetting to drink. A burly man gleefully said, "Oh ho, truly a beauty at first sight." He stood up and approached Blair. "Beautiful lady, what brings you here?" Blair looked at him in shock. This situation was beyond her ability to handle. It was far scarier than she had imagined. Another man sneered, "Hey, who invited their lover to the guild? Speak up." They began to jeer more aggressively. "I think she's mine." "What are you talking about? She looks more like my wife." Blair cautiously spoke up. "I am here to see the guildmaster." The burly man from earlier replied coldly, "The guildmaster is busy. He doesn't handle small matters like this." He stepped closer, soliciting, "Instead, why don't you talk to us?" He leaned in close to her face. "We'll handle it cheaply and quickly. How about we get a drink and discuss it? What gave our beautiful lady the courage to come here?" These scums were a far cry from her husband's elegance, disgusting Blair to the point that she clenched her fists tightly. A calm male voice rang out, "Stop teasing her, you'll scare her away." A ring with a blue gemstone was held up in front of his face. The one-eyed man immediately fell silent. Blair stated decisively, "Please take me to see the guildmaster." The man let out a sinister, amused chuckle. Then he roared, grinding his teeth. Do you think we're a bunch of stray dogs? Do you think we just wag our tails for money? Blair remained silent, suppressing the fear in her heart, and then abruptly replied, Haven't you all been in this business for a long time? Then you should know how to behave better, shouldn't you? Or do you not realize how foolish it is to kill the goose that lays the golden eggs? The crowd fell silent, staring at the young girl in front of them. They clearly weren't afraid of her. A few people started murmuring curiously, What, is she some big shot? Did we mess with the wrong person? In a corner, a bartender worked quietly, ignoring the commotion around him. A man dressed in black loudly asked, So we have a client? Wearing an authoritative plague doctor mask, the mysterious man said, You are the one who wishes to see me? Blair looked at him and sighed. She asserted, No, I want to see the guildmaster. The masked man claimed to be the guildmaster once again, but Blair turned away angrily. Is deceiving customers the rule of Liberius? She walked straight to the bar and spoke directly to the bartender. I want to submit my request to the guildmaster of Liberius. The young man with his refined appearance and godly side profile finally looked up, feigning indifference. He slowly set down the glass in his hand and ended his part-time shift. May I ask why you think I am the guildmaster? Blair exposed him. When I asked for the master, they all looked around and whispered. You alone simply listened. I'll ask about your reasons for testing me another time. The handsome young man gave a faint, amused smile. He proudly said, Impressive, you truly have a sharp eye. Then he suggested moving the conversation to a quieter place. They entered the guild's office, and the conversation became formal. Allow me to introduce myself, Duchess. My name is Mikhail Kinnis. He bowed respectfully according to protocol. Please forgive my prior offense. I wanted to gauge the level of your desperation, Duchess. With a stoic expression, he admitted, Those who come to me are all desperate enough to pay the corresponding price. Blair reassured him, It's fine. It only shows you are confident in your ability to succeed flawlessly and cleanly. The boss smiled and bowed in agreement. Liberius will not betray that trust. Mikhail sat down and seriously asked for the details of the client's request. Blair, with her youthful face, tried to act tough and held up 3 fingers. I have 3 requests. First, find me a small villa near Argenta, the capital of the Clania Kingdom, and a new identity so I can live without my current name. The boss glanced at her, wondering about her motives for fleeing the duchy as Blair folded one finger down. She continued, Second, I need a few men to be involved in a scandal with me, around 4 or 5. They must all be trustworthy enough to keep this an absolute secret. The guildmaster suggested, In that case, it would be best if I were one of them. That way I can report the progress to you directly. Would that be okay? Blair nodded in agreement. If you don't mind, I'd like that as well. I can trust you. He asked impatiently, When do you want the scandal to officially break out? Blair froze. She asked why she had been figured out so quickly. You catch on really fast, just as expected from a professional. That will make things easier. I want it to happen next month. Mikhail looked at her with skepticism and suddenly chuckled. Then we must begin immediately. And what is your final request? Blair slowly pulled something out from her sleeve. She carefully placed a piece of paper on the table. I need you to find the owner of a knife engraved with this design. Mikhail took the small drawing in his hand and scanned his memory. Then he promised to bring back the investigation results as soon as possible for the client in front of him. Blair left satisfied, personally escorted out by the guildmaster himself. The crowd bowed respectfully to the Duchess as she walked out the door. Mikhail felt a bit unsettled inside. He lowered his gaze to hide his emotions beneath a stoic exterior. However, he couldn't help but feel amused and let out a soft chuckle. The subordinates' curiosity about their master's hospitable attitude was answered by him. I just had some indecent thoughts. With such a serious face, Mikhail recounted the event to his subordinates. He wondered to himself, that gesture, it was as if she was treating me like a child. To be honest, she is quite cute, they agreed regarding this new client. Outside the guild building, one of Herdine's subordinates stood eavesdropping. He then returned and immediately reported the entire incident to the Duke that very night. My lord, the Duchess visited a guild. Herdine stopped the cigar in his hand, looking curious. What are you suddenly talking about? The assistant recounted that Sir Jerome had been patrolling the estate. and he had seen the Duchess sneaking out with her personal maid an hour ago. He had followed them and watched them enter the merchant guild. Herdine was quite curious. At what time? The assistant confirmed they had returned home safely. The Duke muttered, "Who would have thought my gentle-looking wife had a hobby of sneaking out? She has certainly surprised me." The assistant asked if they should investigate the reasons behind her actions, but her husband didn't find it necessary. Herdine's friend was worried that the Duchess might collude with the royal family, or even try to seize control of the Delmark family herself. But her husband analyzed both theories. First, the royal family wouldn't risk using the princess. The emperor had no shortage of obedient pawns. That sounded completely reasonable. Next, whether they had any future plans, that was also a matter for another time. He trusted in the power he possessed. It was a strong enough card that Herdine could never be discarded as long as the emperor reigned. The friend asked again, "Then why did she go to the guild?" How could Herdine know? He was far more curious about what thoughts were running through his wife's little head. He knew Mikhail's personality. The man would keep his business secrets, and digging into it would only cause an uproar, and then she would just hide things even more meticulously. Beneath his calm exterior, Herdine was also quite impatient. He was so lost in thought that he forgot to finish the cigar in his hand. Suddenly, he ordered, "For now, just keep an eye on her. Don't get caught." And just like that, a few days quickly passed. Tomorrow was the New Year's festival. Blair welcomed a rather special guest, a middle-aged woman. She introduced herself as Agnes Laureline. "I belong to a vassal family of the Delmark Duchy." She was a hypnotherapist hired by Herdine. With a gentle demeanor, she curtsied respectfully. "I will do my best to help you recover your memories, Duchess." Blair replied politely, "Thank you." Tea was poured for the guest while she spoke mildly. "I won't immediately force your memories to surface. We'll start by helping you get used to them." She was straightforward. "Duchess, you have lost a portion of your memories due to severe psychological trauma. Forcing them in this case will only cause you to bury them deeper." Blair was curious. Getting used to them, what does that mean? The therapist planned for them to have relaxing tea sessions like this every week, and she would listen to Blair talk about her childhood. She smiled kindly. Any story will do. Blair was hesitant, as this method would be time-consuming, and she was quite in a hurry with her escape plan. She calculated that if she didn't manage to end this contract marriage before getting pregnant, Herdine would definitely find out about the child. And every time she underwent hypnosis, she would suffer agonizing pain. That would be dangerous if she were already pregnant. In 6 months, according to the original timeline, Azil would come into this world. She needed to recover her memories before then, at any cost. That anxiety did not escape the therapist's eyes. She looked at Blair thoughtfully and sympathetically, then said, "Please don't worry too much, Duchess. I will help you recover your memories." She held Blair's hand sincerely. "Please relax and trust me." Blair felt more at ease. "All right. By listening to your stories, Duchess, I will learn about another lifetime." The conversation grew more intimate. Come to think of it, today is already the last day of the year. Yes, time really does fly. Madame Agnes suddenly thought of a slightly difficult topic, which was Blair's memory of the New Year's festival. She was quite surprised by this question. "Yes, from the accident that year, do you remember anything that happened during the festival? Even a small detail is fine." Blair hesitated, reassuring herself. "It probably won't be too hard." She closed her eyes to relax. Because that was the day I met Herdine. The memory easily surfaced in her mind. It was something she had always cherished. At that banquet, the nobles chatted in the lavish halls of the imperial palace. Back then, she was about to turn 11, and she was exchanging greetings with her relatives. After putting on a beautiful dress, Blair skipped happily to the former Empress's palace. For some reason, the Empress had been so busy lately that she couldn't even see her. The innocent little girl was looking forward to playing cards with the Empress. "I'll definitely win today, just watch." As the doors to the Empress's palace opened, the little princess ran in, calling her name with joy. The Empress gently turned around. "You're just in time." Beside her, a young boy was observing her. Blair guessed this was the nephew the Empress often mentioned. She often told her that he was her only nephew and the current head of the Delmark family. She added, "He is very lonely. It would be wonderful if he had a good friend like you, Blair." Blair confidently said, "Don't worry, Your Majesty. I'll definitely become his friend when we meet. And now Herdine was standing right in front of her, full of coldness. Greet her, Herdine, this is the princess, the Empress reminded him. The young boy Herdine knelt down to pay his respects. Herdine of the Delmark family sends his greetings to you, princess. Although all his gestures were elegant, his eyes were as cold as a deep lake, which frightened her. Blair replied, It's nice to meet you, Delmark. The Empress looked at the two children, quite pleased, believing they would become close. But the awkwardness between them wouldn't be easily dispelled. The Empress suggested playing cards, and Blair was naturally excited. The chairs were rearranged so they could begin their fun. Blair nestled beside the Empress, looking at Herdine, who seemed unapproachable. Delmark was a family that everyone once envied, but they had now fallen. They were the subject of gossip among the nobles, those who always gloated over the misfortunes of others. The origins of the Delmarks, the price they had to pay, and how everything ended. It was a mystery to many, not just to the little princess. Blair felt that he was quite intimidating. Herdine sensed the round eyes glued to him. He glanced back and showed no hostility toward the beautiful little girl. The game began, and Herdine secretly observed the angelic little princess in front of him. She intently calculated the cards in her hand, and the ones in Herdine's hand. She reached out to draw a card amid his silence. The early feats of the Delmark ancestors had built their family's reputation. There was a national hero who had saved the country during the last magic war. To gain that power, he had forged a pact with a legendary divine beast. In exchange, he received a powerful body capable of using both magic and aura. Normally, one could only wield one of these two abilities. But that duke had used both to achieve victory and save the nation. However, everything has its price. The greater the power, the higher the cost. Mixing aura and magic was like mixing oil and fire. If controlled well, they would resonate, but a single mistake could cause a loss of control. The power bestowed upon the first master had been passed down through generations. Herdine's father, the previous duke, was their descendant. Just like his ancestors, he had used his power for the people and the empire. Everyone both feared and admired him. However, tragedy struck without warning. It happened the year Herdine turned 12. During a family picnic in the forest, his parents were attacked by demonic beasts. Upon discovering this, Herdine's father lost control and slaughtered every monster in the forest. By then, he had gone mad. And to protect his son from being killed by his own hands, he used his final moment of clarity to end his own life, right in front of a terrified little Herdine. The fall of the revered Delmark family and their tragedy became a topic of conversation for curious strangers. It wasn't hard for this information to circulate within the imperial palace. And they whispered to one another that the son of the Delmark family also inherited this power, meaning he could also go mad at any moment. Herdine reminded her, Princess, it's your turn. Blair hesitated over the card she was about to draw. She had already lost 4 rounds, and no child ever wants to lose. Amidst Herdine's patience, Blair slowly drew an ace of hearts from his hand. Herdine's eyes suddenly widened as he looked at her. Blair was also startled by that stroke of luck. 2 cards with bright red hearts sat next to each other. Blair cheered, I win! While Blair was still busy celebrating her victory, Herdine stood up to take his leave. The Empress also realized it was getting quite late. Herdine promised to return the next day, while Blair couldn't stop smiling from her recent stroke of luck. The Empress said gently, Herdine, I understand how you feel, but you don't have to force yourself to attend tomorrow's banquet. He bowed his head and replied, I am fine. The door closed with a sense of regret. The Empress turned and asked Blair, What do you think of Herdine? Do you think the two of you could become friends? Blair was momentarily stumped by that difficult question. She replied shyly, He is quite quiet, so it's hard to guess, but he seems like a good person. The Empress sighed. Blair, lying for too long will become a bad habit. Blair spoke honestly. To be honest, the Lord of Delmark seems both polite and impolite at the same time. The Empress laughed. I'm glad Herdine didn't hear that. Blair startled. But this is only our first time meeting. She said sincerely, Since your Majesty cares for him, I'm sure he must be a good person. I mean it. The Empress looked at her, pleased and gentle. She suddenly grabbed Blair's small hands and pulled her into a hug. On the soft sofa, her voice was soothing. To be honest, Herdine is not a warm person. He carries deep scars in his heart, so he always feels awkward around others. But that doesn't mean you have to endure him, because you are just as precious to me as he is." She kissed Blair's forehead affectionately. Blair beamed in her embrace. It was a comfort for the little girl. Because her own biological mother would never be so gentle with her. She had never spoken such words to Blair. The sun soon rose, and the New Year's festival officially began. That morning, as usual, the royal family and other noble houses went hunting for sacrifices in the forest. And in the afternoon, they held a worship ceremony at the temple. By nightfall, a grand banquet would take place at the imperial palace. The morning and afternoon were rituals meant for adults. So Ivan, her older brother, and she did not attend those ceremonies until the evening. Right now, they were sitting by the throne, waiting for the greetings from the vassals. During the banquet, Herdine emerged as the center of attention. The nobles whispered about the sudden debut of the legendary Delmark family's heir. They muttered to each other, "I knew at the moment I saw him at the hunting grounds and the temple sacrifice." Herdine walked coldly, the murmurs continuing behind his back. "He has to restore his family's honor and support the Empress. That won't be easy." He approached the throne and spoke solemnly. "It is an honor to welcome the new year under your reign, Your Majesty. May you continue to protect the empire with your grace in the coming years." The royals and nobles were astonished by the young man's nobility and etiquette. He truly embodied the demeanor of a family head. The Empress, seated high above, felt very pleased. Herdine's youth and beauty made him stand out even more in the crowd. However, seeing this boy having to shoulder the burden of a family head so early, Blair couldn't help but feel pity for him. She easily recognized the lonely melancholy in Herdine's eyes. The story continued to pour from Blair's warm memories. She didn't hesitate to tell the therapist about her initial fear when they first met. Madame Agnes expressed her admiration for the bond that grew from childhood friends to marriage, calling it a truly romantic story. Blair asked skeptically, "Really?" Agnes laughed. "Of course, isn't that every girl's dream?" She emphasized, "Not to mention your partner is the Grand Duke. But of course it's your love that makes it so romantic, Duchess." Blair was surprised. "Love?" Agnes nodded. "Yes, because you are the one who cherished that memory." She was even more surprised when Agnes pointed out, "You must have other memories of the New Year's festival, Duchess, yet you mostly remembered the Duke." The therapist's assertion left Blair stunned. "You must have loved him very much." Blair lowered her head in silence. She couldn't say that he had completely captured her heart in her past life. Actually, there was another part of her memory from that banquet that she hadn't mentioned. Amidst the bustling noise, little Blair walked past the murmuring gossip about poor Herdine. "Good heavens, how tragic," they said. He stood there, likely having heard it all, but still maintained an indifferent expression. They said that the young Duke of Delmark had a striking face, but to look so cold at such a young age was unexpected. Blair thought to herself that if the Empress had been there, no one would dare be so insolent, but unfortunately, she was tired and had retired to rest. And so, no one at the banquet stood up for Herdine. They even warned each other to stay away from him because he might go mad like his father and slaughter them all. "By the way, have you heard about Count Burming?" "Oh, what happened?" Herdine wasn't deaf. He brushed past all of them and walked out the door. The young boy's slender figure stood lonely among the unfamiliar adults. Light from the castle spilled out through the windows. Herdine was coughing intensely in a corner. Exhausted, he leaned against a tree trunk, suppressing his coughs. At that moment, Blair stood behind him and softly spoke. Excuse me, are you okay?" Her hand hesitantly reached out toward him. But Herdine hadn't noticed her. He abruptly spun around and yelled angrily, "Get lost! Don't touch me!" Blair's hand was swatted away, causing her to lose her balance and fall backward. Only then did Herdine stare at her in shock. The little princess sat on the snowy ground, looking up at him with expectant eyes. She asked, "Are you okay?" Her concern softened Herdine slightly. She continued to reach her hand out toward his eyes. "You look tired, I was just going to pat your back." By now, his anger had dissipated, but Herdine still stepped back as a strange sensation washed over him. He warned her, "Didn't you hear me? Get lost if you don't want to die." It was a genuine warning, devoid of any malice. Blair remembered the Empress's words about him being unapproachable due to his emotional scars. It was absolutely true, but to Blair that didn't really matter. She believed he wasn't a bad person. Herdine turned on his heel to walk away, expecting nothing from a stranger. but the image of his loneliness amidst the lavish banquet made Blair feel a pang of sympathy. Just as he indifferently turned his face to leave, Blair called out to stop him. "Don't go!" She gathered all her courage to call out Herdine's name. He froze. She said, "Just wait here for a moment. I'll be right back, I promise." Herdine watched her run back into the mansion, his heart filled with confusion. He sighed, wondering what that little princess wanted. Herdine grumbled inwardly, "What kind of princess doesn't know she's not supposed to run around like that?" Very quickly, Blair returned just as she had promised. As Herdine sat there exhausted, her clear voice rang out, "Found you!" Herdine looked at the rushing princess and couldn't help but ask, "Why did you come back here?" She immediately placed something soft and white into our young man's hands. "I'm lending this to you." Blair explained the item in his hands. "These are rabbit fur earmuffs. If you put them on, you won't have to hear those words anymore." Herdine's hostility vanished completely, replaced only by curiosity about the soft object in his hands. Blair thought to herself, "These earmuffs will block out the sound of people gossiping. It's winter right now, so it won't look weird to them if he wears them. And this is my favorite item, Herdine." She leaned in to advertise it further. "They're super soft, too." She was full of hope that this item would make Herdine's senses and mood feel softer and more pleasant. Herdine picked up the earmuffs and examined them seemingly carefully, but in truth, he didn't care about them as much as he cared about the little girl in front of him. Just then a voice called out from afar someone was looking for Blair. She hurriedly turned to leave, not forgetting to add, "People will only remember how amazing you look." Placing a finger over her lips, she promised to keep today a secret. Herdine watched her dainty small figure disappear, feeling dazed. That night, before falling asleep, the little princess made a wish, just as she always did. Earlier, when she returned inside, Blair was drenched in sweat from running around, and her maid scolded her gently. "You can't just disappear like that. I was so worried. Why are you sweating so much?" "I'm sorry." The little girl back then simply wished that her own mother would love and care for her just like that. She wished that her mother and the Empress could get along, and her final wish for the day was dedicated to a new friend. Even though she didn't like him because he had monopolized the Empress's attention. But please, let the Duke of Delmark be happy. That night, Herdine spent quite some time touching those soft earmuffs, feeling a sense of comfort in his heart. Returning to reality, after the conversation ended, the therapist's assertion still echoed in Blair's mind. "You must have loved him very much." It was true, Blair had once loved him very much. She walked listlessly down the hallway, thinking to herself, "Just as Madame Agnes said, I was drawn to him ever since that New Year's festival." But now, not anymore. She used to cherish those days, that much was true. She had also hinted at this to Madame Agnes earlier. At that time, she had smiled. Sometimes a moment of happiness can give us the strength to live an entire lifetime. I hope this year's New Year festival will bring you such memories, Duchess. Thinking of those kind words, Blair grumbled in frustration. Memories, Even so, it's a new year I've already lived through, so there's nothing new about it. Her footsteps grew quiet. For a moment, her emotions suddenly became a tangled mess. Come to think of it, she didn't even have memories of how this New Year's Day played out in her past life. Her memory of their first New Year's festival after getting married had become so faded. She didn't have much of an impression of it. Perhaps their relationship had been quite distant after their marriage and their past life. While trying to rummage through her memories, Blair suddenly flinched, her eyes widening in fear. The man she both loved and hated had just opened the door for her. She was standing exactly in front of his room. Herdine asked coldly, "What brings you here at this hour?" Blair gathered all her courage to say, "There's something I simply must tell you. Tomorrow a demonic beast will appear at the New Year's festival hunting grounds. It would be best if you sent someone to scout the area and set up defenses before the hunt begins." These words left Herdine astonished. He stared intently at his wife. He asked, "Where did you hear that from?" Blair lowered her head and stammered, I... She made up a lie on the spot. "I can see the future." Herdine looked at his wife in shock. "What did you just say?" The truth was, about an hour ago, Blair had realized something. Thanks to her conversation with Agnes, Blair remembered that in her past life, a demonic beast had attacked during the hunt. That incident wasn't prominent in her memory because it hadn't happened right in front of her. Blair had caught a cold that day. Lena had recounted how the Duke got hurt, but fortunately, no one was killed. Lena had mentioned that the Duke was covered in the beast's blood but wasn't injured, and Blair had felt relieved at the time. But she suddenly grew worried when thinking about the risks to her husband. Following the original flow of the past, he was supposed to be fine. But what if her interference had altered that flow? Blair turned pale with fear. What if things got worse because she had impacted them? And how would she explain it if he asked how she knew beforehand? Was she supposed to say she had been reincarnated? Would Herdine actually believe such a ridiculous story? Blair weighed her options for a long time before sighing. At this moment, the prepared words just tumbled out of Blair's innocent mouth. I can see the future. Herdine looked at her for a moment with deep skepticism. Then he rubbed his temples wearily. You expect me to believe that right now? Blair pleaded. It sounds absurd, but please believe me. It never hurts to be prepared. She thought to herself, he trusted me about Lena last time. A person who protected me immediately without hesitation. Perhaps he'll believe me this time too. Even though this was more absurd than that situation, she still hoped for success. He simply replied helplessly, I understand. But what he was truly focusing on wasn't the content of her story. Herdine suddenly grabbed her waist. He tensed up as he pulled her small frame tightly against his own. Then why don't you predict what I'm going to do next? Blair was so caught off guard she was dazed. Her husband's expression seemed a chaotic mess. He whispered close to her face, Is it that hard to guess? After all, it's quite simple. Terrified, Blair pushed him away. The bitter past had not faded from her heart. His touch only filled her with disgust. Blair turned away. I'm sorry. I must have been daydreaming. Thinking that her warning to him hadn't been very successful, she turned to head back to her room. Herdine didn't try to hold her back. He sadly turned and went back inside. He picked up the glass of hard liquor on the table and downed it in one gulp to calm himself. Wiping away the drops of liquor on his lips, Herdine sighed, restraining himself. What was she thinking? Coming here at this hour in that flimsy nightgown? The next day finally arrived. The hunting ceremony commenced early. Blair's warning wasn't ignored by Herdine. He and his retinue rode their horses on patrol around the area. He looked back, silently observing his wife. He wondered to himself, what on earth is she thinking, daring to follow us all the way here after saying such things? Herdine instructed warily, Kyle, ensure the Duchess's absolute safety. Yes, my lord. From the front, with his keen senses, he realized the cold was causing his little princess to cough miserably. As he frowned in pity for his wife, a subordinate shouted, My lord, there's a white stoat over there! Herdine drew his bow and aimed with cold precision. The arrow flew rapidly through the air. The white stoat only had time to turn its head in confusion before it could react. Its terrified squeak rang out, then quickly fell silent. The hunting party cheered, praising the legendary Duke's skill. Having watched this, Blair felt horrified. Herdine dismounted and walked over to the animal he had just hunted. Suddenly, a small cry from the base of a tree caught his attention. Inside a hollow was a baby stoat, and the one over there was its mother. Herdine didn't say a word. He drew the small dagger in his hand and slowly crouched down. Blair cried out, Herdine! What are you doing? Her call made him stop. But with the dagger still raised, he replied, Without its mother to care for it, it will soon become a meal for other predators. It's better to let it lie beside its mother. A fairly convincing logic. Yet the little stoat slept soundly, oblivious to it all. Blair suddenly screamed, No! She jumped off her horse and rushed over to grab his hand, her face filled with panic. Herdine said helplessly, What do you think you're doing? Blair pleaded, It can survive. She looked at him full of reproach. Even if it's destined to die young like you said, you can't call this mercy. Living another day is still better than dying. Herdine frowned. Do you think you would feel that way while being eaten alive by wolves? Blair clung to his arm, begging, I will raise it. Her eyes were resolute, filled with both fear and a tragic resentment. Herdine finally sheathed his dagger. It was the only way to detach her hands from him. He said coldly before turning to leave, I wonder if this creature would truly want to be adopted by the one who stood by and watched its mother die. Blair watched him go. She understood the hidden meaning in those words, but she was still just a traumatized child who had lost her memories at the time. She spoke up. Even so, I'm sure its mother would want it to live, even if it's like this. She also had another memory, one where Aziel might have lived when his mother sacrificed herself to protect him. Holding the baby stoat in her hands, Blair felt immense pity for it. She missed her son so much. What had happened to Aziel after she died in her past life? Did that cruel man hurt him? Even if he managed to survive, he would be a thorn in Herdeen's side, because he only ever loved Miela Elias. The thought of her orphaned son made Blair's heart ache. The questions swirled endlessly in her mind. Blair truly understood. Aziel's fate couldn't have been good either. She stared at her husband's back, full of resentment. Once again, I hate you. Kyle stepped up and offered to hold the little animal so she could mount her horse. But Blair dared not trust anyone, clutching it tightly. It's fine, I'll hold it. She ignored Kyle's words. Riding a horse in your current condition will be very difficult, Duchess, and it's dangerous too. Her husband looked back and felt a twinge of pain, so much so that he had to frown. Herdeen dismounted and walked back toward Blair. Before she could say another word, his large hands had already lifted her up. He placed her onto his own horse and commanded loudly, "Keep an eye on the Duchess's horse." His indulgence toward her was truly commendable. On horseback, Blair kept insisting on getting down to walk, claiming she was fine, while her husband noted that without using her hands, she couldn't ride. Blair sulked and didn't say anything else, and Herdeen had never been one for many words. However, his arm wrapped even tighter around her waist. She claimed she was fine, but her coughing fits from the cold betrayed Blair. She was suddenly stunned when he gently pulled her cloak's hood up to cover her. Blair asked, "Why did you follow me all the way here?" Herdeen replied, "I heard that demonic beasts often appear in this area. You should have stayed at the estate for safety." Blair glanced back at her husband's warmth, gradually calming down. She had been looking around all this time and hadn't seen a single demonic beast. There were no strange roars. Did this mean the past had been altered by her presence? She lowered her head and whispered, "I'm sorry. I must have just had a nightmare." But right as she finished speaking, a massive blood-red eye stared right at her. Blair was so terrified she lost her voice. It took her forever to softly cry out, "Herdeen!" just as the monster lunged upward. It swatted a large tree, snapping it in half with a loud crack. Its horrifying appearance made the beast's destructive power all the more terrifying. Blair had never witnessed it before. Even as she was thrown to the ground, she couldn't scream, only hearing her husband's desperate shout, "Blair!" It was a rare occasion for him to call her by name. Kyle rushed over to protect the Duchess, while Herdeen only had a moment to glance over and confirm his wife wasn't severely injured. Even the small animal remained intact in Blair's hands. He held her tightly in fear. "Can you stand up?" Blair let out a soft, helpless cry of fear. She watched her husband cast protective magic to shield them, before passing out in his arms. Herdeen held her with one arm, glaring at the monster amidst the soldiers' screams, "My lord, hurry and dodge!" It was gigantic and ferocious, relentlessly chasing after him. Herdeen felt more terrified than ever before. Holding her, he leaped out of its reach, simultaneously ordering the archers to fire. Immediately, a barrage of sharp arrows struck the beast. Fortunately, thanks to her warning, they were ready for battle. Handing Blair over to Kyle, he took off his cloak while barking orders. "Squad 1, quickly escort the Duchess out of the forest right now. Squad 2, stay with me and hold back the monsters." Herdeen draped his coat over his wife's shoulders and said, "Just hold on for a little while." But as soon as he turned to leave, his hand was tightly grabbed by hers. "Wait." She knew that in the future, Herdeen would survive. He would be safe, she knew that. But facing this danger right now, her heart was still in a panic. She looked at him in fear, her eyes full of sorrow. Herdeen reassured her, "Do you think I'm going to die?" To him, this concern from her was a first since their marriage, and he was touched by it. However, Blair was still handed over to Squad 1. "Duchess, we have to go." Herdeen and the beast officially clashed. Leaping high into the air and slashing downwards, Herdeen truly proved himself a legend. His powerful sword strikes, imbued with magic, made the space around them flash brightly. But this monster was no pushover, it was even faster than he was. Herdeen delivered a direct, precise slash to its weak point. The monster clutched its head and roared, yet it remained completely unharmed. Herdeen stepped back slightly. The clash was so intense that Squad 1, who hadn't even left yet, had to look back and worry. Wait, is his attack too weak? The sword can't even pierce its skin? Herdine terrifyingly realized he didn't have enough mana to deal with this horrendous monster. He was standing on the brink of imminent danger. Over there, the knights were also worried. He hasn't gathered enough mana. What is going on? Herdine gripped his sword tightly and calculated. In this situation, I'll slice off its limbs first to immobilize it. Swinging his sword downward, Herdine immediately executed his plan. But the moment he got closer, it locked its sights on him. Herdine only had time to freeze and stare at it before being snatched up by its massive hand. He struggled helplessly. The monster was just too huge. Blair watched him in horror, screaming, "Herdine, Herdine!" Just then, beams of red light emanated from her and flew into the air like threads. One of those red beams shot past Herdine's eyes, startling him. In that moment of despair, a strange image appeared in his mind. It was Blair, pregnant, smiling at him affectionately. Herdine was stunned, wondering to himself, what in the world is this memory? This is the latest episode of this series. Please follow the channel to see the next developments. Thank you. Herdine was certain that the memory that flashed through his mind in that life or death moment was real. It was unequivocally a piece of her memory. But could this presence actually be? He pondered, a sudden spark gleaming in Herdine's eyes as he deduced something. The flow of memories flashing through his mind was faint, but what he saw clearly was the gloomy face of his pregnant wife. In that desperate moment facing the attacking monster, Herdine suddenly felt a surge of mana stronger than ever before. Surging power and combat instincts pulled Herdine back to reality. From midair, he fired that surge of mana straight down at the rampaging beast. Magic spells were also cast simultaneously. Instantly, a massive magic circle enveloped a vast area. The monster was bound within that overwhelming power. Herdine funneled all the gathered energy straight onto the beast's head, releasing a thunderous explosion accompanied by a blinding light. The Duke observed intently with a cold, sharp gaze. He delivered final, decisive sword strikes to the giant monster. Everything was finally settled. At this moment, he himself was completely exhausted, wondering why he hadn't been able to channel his mana earlier. Perhaps because he hadn't trained for the past 2 months while busy with the wedding, his mana control might have weakened. Yet the mana amount earlier had suddenly dropped as if it had evaporated into thin air. And then it returned abruptly, enabling him to instantly harness that power. Herdine was baffled, unable to comprehend what had just transpired. At that moment, his wife's voice called out in anxiety, "Herdine!" She ran toward him with a terrified look, but he no longer had the strength to stand up. Looking at Blair's dazed expression, he recalled the memory he had just witnessed, which further solidified his belief that it was real, as the gentle gaze she gave him was identical. Covered in dirt from the monster and wounded all over, he still tried his best to stand up and walk toward her. But at this moment, the steadfast Duke could no longer move, clutching his chest in agony. Blair rushed panic-stricken toward her husband as he stumbled. Blair urgently called out to him and ordered treatment for the Duke. "Quickly, take him to the temple." When they arrived at the temple, a monk came out and stated that all the priests were currently away. By now, Herdine was slightly more lucid, leaning weary against Blair. The monk mentioned that at least one person was currently in charge of training priests, and asked the Duke to step inside the temple immediately. Herdine seemed more preoccupied with what had just happened than with his own injuries. Meanwhile, the Emperor was dealing with the hunting event's cancellation due to the demon's appearance. Ivan summoned the royal forest warden, reprimanded him, and ordered the royal knights to conduct a thorough investigation. Although the evening banquet was cancelled after this incident, they decided the New Year celebration would be held a bit later. At the temple, Blair and Herdine were led inside the main sanctuary. The Duchess held her husband's cloak as they waited to be treated there. Herdine removed more layers of clothing stained by the magical beast earlier. Unable to contain his curiosity, he asked Blair, "Did you truly see the future?" Not knowing what he had just seen, she asked him back, "I thought you said it was unbelievable." Herdine replied, "If things keep unfolding like this, I will have no choice but to believe you, even if I don't want to." He questioned her again about the exact details of the future she had seen. Blair fell silent, unable to answer that it wasn't the future but the past. Just then the priest was summoned and arrived. That person was hurriedly led inside by the monk. And in that moment, Blair felt as if she had died once more as the female priest's greeting resounded. "Greetings, Your Grace and Duchess." The captivating woman once again stood before Blair. "My name is Miela Ailas." Blair was completely shocked, standing frozen in place. Dazed, she thought in despair, How could this be possible? It turned out there was a chapter of the past she never knew. They had known each other prior to this. It was simply because she hadn't been present at this event in her past life that she didn't know. Miela gazed intently at Herden, her wide eyes fixed on him without blinking. Only when the monk reminded her did she remember her task of healing. Miela placed her hands on Herden's wound and began the purification. Herden looked at her indifferently, yet Miela seemed distracted while touching the Duke's body. And the one frozen by past anguish stood there watching them, Blair feeling terrified by this reality. All the fear and resentment flooded into the young woman's mind at once. Herden's betrayal, which she witnessed with her own eyes in her past life, felt like a dagger piercing her heart. Images replayed in Blair's mind like torture. It was so painful that she frowned and broke into a cold sweat. Soon the treatment was finished, and Herden felt invigorated once more. The monk stated that preparations to serve the Duke were underway and he should get ready, to which the Duke nodded in agreement. Miela placed her hand on her chest in bow. "I am glad to be of help to you. I pray that the Lord grants you blessings, your grace." Afterwards, she stepped outside, lingering at the door to cast one last regretful glance at Herden. At this time, clean attire was brought to the Duke, who was putting on a shirt with a thoughtful expression. Meanwhile, his wife's face had turned icy cold, as if she had become a completely different person. For the first time, Herden was stunned to see Blair's pale face mixed with a trace of deep resentment. Flustered, he reached out toward her. "You look so pale. Were you injured at the hunting grounds?" But she coldly brushed Herden's hand away and replied, "I am fine." Still immersed in her pain, she couldn't comprehend why this was happening, why the exact way he hurt her in the past was repeating so precisely now. Earlier, when Herden was injured, she had been so worried about him, even though she still hated him so much. In that life and death moment, she realized all too clearly that she still loved him, and that was truly a fatal weakness. Blair lowered her head and said, "You asked what I saw in the future. In truth, there was no future at all. There was only the reality that she hated him to the bone." Blair looked up at her husband, hating herself for still being unable to let go. She confronted Herden and declared, "That priestess earlier, she is the woman you will come to love." Every word from Blair was like a blade slicing through the already fragile bond between them. The boundary she just drew left Herden in profound shock as he exclaimed, "What?" The woman whose affection he had painstakingly cultivated suddenly showed contempt, stating, "She will make a suitable mistress for you." Her words felt like a hammer striking Herden's head as she continued coldly like a stranger. However, it is still too early to bring her in as a mistress. As I told you, there will be no stain on your reputation before our divorce. If we can squash the rumors, then after that— Her words were suddenly stopped by his hand. Herden reached out to touch her face in fear. He touched her lips, fearful that she might disappear at any moment. The Duke stood there helpless, feeling he was on the verge of losing the struggle to hold on to her heart. In a frantic rush, he held her face tightly and kissed her lips. After a deep kiss, he leaned close to her face and groaned, "Why on earth would I need a mistress?" Herden felt angry as he declared, "Not when I have you!" The Duke wrapped his arms around her waist, pulling his wife close. "As long as this contract remains valid, you are my wife. I will do this, and far more than this, with only you." Herden's voice was low and firm, yet the woman before him remained aggrieved, gazing at him like a stranger. They had no time to share their feelings, for temple attendants were now urging the Duke to step outside to be served. Herden truly didn't want to let go of Blair, and she too was curious about her husband's behavior compared to the past, as he seemed to cherish her somewhat rather than being heartless like before. The Duke picked up his coat and stepped outside. Blair remained standing there dazed, unsure of what to do. Herden's kiss just now thoroughly confused her. She stood there for a moment and sighed, realizing that ultimately she was living in the present reality. And in this reality, he had never hurt her. Blair's gaze fell upon Herden's tie lying on the floor. In an instant, Blair decided to pick it up, calling out after his receding footsteps, "Herden." She asked him to stop. "Wait a moment." Herden glanced back at his wife, his face looking hurt like an abandoned puppy. He stopped and waited for her. In this slow moment, he felt a flicker of hope rekindle. Blair held out the tie in a tone no longer sharp. "You dropped this." He looked at her expectantly, wanting her to take one more step forward. But since his wife showed no sign of soothing him on her own initiative, he leaned down and said, "Tie it for me." Although he had recovered and had free hands, Herden was not foolish enough to do it himself when he had a beautiful wife by his side. Blair obediently tied the cravat for Herden, while he refrained from touching her with his hands. Yet at such close proximity to Blair, he found her even more stunning. Her gentle, caring manner at this moment truly resembled that of a real wife rather than a contract partner. He gazed intently at her, savoring his privilege. He even intentionally leaned closer to her face to feel her fragrance and warmth. The anger and grievances from earlier seemed temporarily set aside. She said in a soft tone, "There, it's done." At that moment, the bishop entered the hall accompanied by his entourage. From afar he spoke, "Oh, I am very fortunate to see both of you like this. Are you waiting to attend the service?" The elderly priest greeted warmly. His name was Gernard Lumiel. Both the Duke and Duchess bowed in greeting to the bishop, while the old man praised Herden's aid in slaying the demonic beast at the hunting grounds. "You were noble like a hero," Lord Lumiel commended, but Herden merely bowed in humility. "Anyone in my position would have done the same." The bishop smiled. "I am deeply moved to see you both grown up and married." Blair also thanked the bishop sincerely. "It is all thanks to your grace's grace in saving me during the fire. Without your healing, I don't know what would have become of me." At the mention of this, Herden felt slightly annoyed again. Blair glanced at her husband, realizing she had slipped up. But he seemed much calmer now, his former anger toward Blair having vanished. She recalled that when Herden's parents passed away, Lord Lumiel himself presided over their funeral service. Thus, two unfortunate children formed a connection right at this temple, even though their fate stemmed from tragedy. The bishop looked at the young couple before him, hoping that he would be able to move forward. Their intimate conversation unfolded in such a manner. Soon the Duke and Duchess had to return, personally escorted to the door by Lord Lumiel. As Blair stepped outside, a flash of memory sparkled and freed itself from her mind. The priest smiled benevolently as he watched them depart. He silently prayed that they would build a happy home of their own. Returning to the castle, Blair busied herself with the little friend she brought back from the forest. The small marten was docile in her hands. The gentle princess spoke softly to the small creature. "You look much healthier than the other day." Before she knew it, 2 weeks had passed since the New Year event. Blair calculated that it was time to receive a reply from the Merchant Guild. She had yet to see any progress regarding pushing for divorce or locating the murderer she entrusted to the Merchant Guild. Even unlocking memories of the fire showed little progress despite conversations with Madame Agnes. And throughout all that time, she hadn't run into Herden even once. Blair felt a tinge of sorrow thinking about it, though she believed not meeting him was for the better. For now, she was quite content with this peaceful place. Until the time frame she calculated arrived, she was even concerned that this tranquility might make her forget her plans, feeling the need to finish drafting the budget. As she was lost in thought, a knock at the door interrupted her. Her close maid whispered, "My lady, there is a message from the Merchant Guild." Meanwhile, the Merchant Guild master had dressed impeccably for his meeting with her, groomed far beyond work requirements, his face filled with excitement and confidence at the thought of his female client. While the Duchess was scheming to flee, her husband was quite busy with work, listening to his assistant speak of a monostone mine newly discovered in the northern mountains. With abundant reserves and easy extraction, this was truly good news. Herden, as usual, appeared indifferent toward work matters. He was still immersed in questions about his wife. According to the therapist, they had evoked Blair's pleasant memories instead of beginning with painful visions from her memory. Madame Agnes reported that images of the late Empress appeared throughout Blair's happy memories, and that was likely what kept her from wanting to unlock those memories. According to the therapist's conjecture, because she was someone who trusted and relied deeply on others, she seemed terrified of the possibility that that person had killed her. Herden refused to accept that reasoning, as it insulted his aunt, but Agnes argued that the young lady herself was also a victim in that accident. She reminded him that when little Blair woke up without any memories, and when everyone tried to tell her that person intentionally tried to kill her, she naturally came to believe it. At that time, Blair was truly pitiable. And when the succeeding Empress said the same thing, she had no choice but to believe her birth mother was not a liar. This argument irritated Herden further as he muttered, "Selfish thinking." Madame Agnes still tried to convince the Duke that his wife was only an 11-year-old child back then, an age at which she couldn't even care for herself. And the most impactful point the therapist presented was, in all her happy memories, his presence was there. Herden opened his eyes wide in astonishment at what he just heard. He had to ask again to confirm he hadn't misheard, but Madame Agnes affirmed that this evidence showed how much she trusted, relied on, and loved him. And the best treatment suggested was that he should personally talk to her about those warm memories. Now, while listening to his assistant's report, Herden was still contemplating how to strike up a conversation with Blair. At the moment he idly glanced out at the street, his eyes caught his innocent girl secretly sneaking out of the house, the Duke's gaze turning sharp as eternal ice once more. Not far away, his wife was standing beside another man. The assistant who had been reporting relentlessly now realized that not a single word had entered his boss's ears. Herden asked coldly, "Do you know about the performance at that theater recently?" The assistant recounted that he knew. It was an epic play featuring divine beasts portrayed by masked actors. And while the location appeared to be an art stage, it was actually a secret dating spot for nobles. Herden repeated the phrase dating spot bitterly, pressing his lips together. Thinking of his beautiful princess who was usually cold toward him, he couldn't help becoming suspicious. Herden's gaze was both sorrowful and frosty. Suddenly, the Duke seriously reconsidered terms such as play, dating, and masks. Blair stepped inside the theater at that moment, wearing splendid attire completely different from when she was at home. The Merchant Guild Master politely offered his hand to support her. "I hope your journey here was not too difficult." Blair handed her hand to him and thanked him, sharing that she had to convince her protective knights to let her take a quiet stroll. They sat down at a pre-reserved table, and the Merchant Master poured wine into 2 luxurious glasses. Instead of enjoying the luxury, Blair eagerly inquired whether the man had completed the purchase of the villa in that empire. The master's pale yellow eyes did not stray from Blair, as he likely only wanted them to sip wine together. Nevertheless, he remarked that he had worked extremely hard, yet she wouldn't give him a moment to catch his breath, which hurt his feelings. Being a major merchant who kept his word, he immediately searched his pocket and retrieved something. A gold coin was presented as a pledge. Blair only needed to go to Argenta and visit the location specified on the coin, and they would immediately hand over the property deed of the villa. Blair gasped in surprise. "Is this Clanian?" It was no ordinary gold coin. It was the final token of Clanian, which meant it was likely a code symbol. Another extremely crucial item delivered before Blair was the identification of the target she requested. Blair joyfully thanked him and promised to reward the Merchant Guild handsomely tomorrow through her maid Lena. The Merchant Master beamed upon being trusted, expressing his delight at being able to help her. Blair looked at him intently with sincerity, trusting the man before her and feeling a sense of familiarity as she gazed at him. She suddenly asked about his spectacles, as he was not wearing them this time, but the man brushed it off, saying the play had already begun. From above, the stage was magnificent with actors and an orchestra. Soothing performances echoed throughout. Actors in elaborate costumes strived to showcase their talents. With an air of sophistication, the man sitting beside Blair introduced the play. It was The Legend of Helios and the Knight Arwen. He pointed toward the stage below where figures representing good and evil clashed. That tragic saga caused Blair to suddenly exclaim, "Arwen, I know." Contrary to the man's focused demeanor, Blair cared little for either him or the play. She glanced around and discovered the sound of a woman crying in a corner of the theater. A mix of scandal and apprehension surged within her as she realized what this place truly was. As if reading Blair's mood, the man beside her remarked coldly, "A place where secret lovers meet and exchange affections. This place is quite suitable for noble ladies, which is why the play features so many combat scenes." The noise on stage had to be loud enough to drown out private sounds from the guest rooms. The man explained to Blair, his expression far from pleased as he spoke of it. The princess felt a hint of embarrassment and disgust, covering her mouth and turning away in silence. Blair's enduring look amused the man beside her. He chuckled softly. Who would have thought that someone shocked by such matters is planning to orchestrate scandals with multiple men? He turned to her and asked, "Do you have any other plans after the divorce?" Blair replied hesitantly, "Well, first of all." With a sly look, the man told her to turn back and look at him while speaking, rather than looking away, whispering to her, "From now on, focus solely on our conversation." Blair looked at the man in surprise and caution, stating in a serious tone, "First, I think I will go into business. though I don't know what sector yet. The young man looked closely at her. On your own? How do you intend to do that? He asked earnestly. Have you prepared the capital? Blair honestly admitted she would prepare it soon. She also requested his assistance in building up that capital. The man smirked with a familiar demeanor. In that case, the stories I gathered during my travels across various countries will prove quite useful. Melodic sounds from the stage continued steadily, yet neither of them seemed to care about the contents of the play. The man suddenly extended his hand as an invitation, while Blair looked at him, filled with curious, unanswered thoughts.